Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and welcome to
Right.
kind of a fine points, but this is kind of a modification. We're going to attempt to try a little different format today, which is sort of like a panel discussion on somewhat open-ended topics that are of interest to Bruce, to Ryan, and to myself. Before I entered the group a little late when in preparation for this, and as I entered, there seemed to be a conversation about uh, you know signal gate, and since that was the conversation, I interrupted, and it seemed a pretty spirited one. Why don't we just continue on that topic first, and then see what topics we morph into after discussing
Yeah.
these texts. So Ryan, you were about to say something, so why don't you start off, and hopefully we'll have a nice, enjoyable conversation.
Sounds good. Well, and for the record, technically, we were talking about whether or not the Constitution applies to everybody that exists in this country, and technically any person really in a lot, lives. And the conversation becoming around whether visa, green card holders, or illegal aliens have constitutional rights, which they do, which is an easily proven fact. But then that kind of overlapped with the signal conversation. So we'll start there, but I'd like to come back to that one as well. But the signal conversation.
That's a great topic, Ryan. Great.
Yeah. Where would you like to start, Jeffrey? You want to start with the
No, you start where you want to start, and then we'll go. So
Okay.
You go ahead, Brian.
Well, then let's start with that one, since that really is the pressing point on my mind. And we were kind of briefly talking before we started to Bruce, and being an expert on this topic, I would really like to flesh this out, because there's so many people right now in a conversation who have been kind of politically mobilized to think, to argue aggressively that nobody in this country has rights except for U.S. citizens. And even in that case, it seems they can just declare someone a terrorist and argue that no longer applies. And so it's important to highlight, the shall not be infringed, inherent God-given right conversation part of this, and I'd love to just kick it to Bruce on this, about whether or not illegal aliens, first and foremost, are protected under the Constitution, have rights, 4th, 15th Amendment, First Amendment, especially around deportation, but then green card holders, and just give me the outline on how that applies, because I think it's really important Americans understand right now that it applies to anybody in this country.
Yeah. The Constitution itself, if we're textualists, it makes distinction between persons as opposed to citizens. There are clauses of the Constitution that apply only to citizens, but the 14th Amendment applies to persons. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or be denied the equal protection of the law. Indeed, in reliance upon those words, the U.S. Supreme Court in 1982, the opinion written by Chief Justice Warren Burger, found that illegal alien children had a constitutional right to attend public school. It's called Plyler versus Doe is the name of that case. And if we think also about the bedrock philosophical underpinnings of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, it speaks of everyone born endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights. It doesn't say citizen, non-citizen, national, just by virtue of being a human being, you have rights. So there's never been any decision ever hinting that if you're not here as a citizen, you're in a free fire zone. Anyone can kill you, rob you, destroy you, rape you, and you have no rights. And obviously, we would be an uncivilized country if that were true. Now, yes, it's possible to amend the Constitution, but that's the clear understanding for 235 years. Very, very, I think, fundamentally worrisome that persons, because of their jingoism, would try to dehumanize everyone who's not a citizen. They're still a person and protected by the Constitution.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, Ryan and Bruce. One is, I think, it frightens me that people, not that it surprises me, but it frightens me that people that ignorant vote. Okay, so that's called a low information voters, and unfortunately, low information voters have a lot of influence in our public policy. And it could be argued that the most influential voters in our public policy are low information voters. Okay. It's got to be, really, you have to be a moron to think that the Constitution only gives rights to citizens And why do I insist that you have to be a moron? One is the Declaration of Independence, which was the, rallying cry of our call for independence, said all men, not American citizens, the people in the 13 colonies, are endowed with rights. It was a natural right declaration, okay? So it was a natural right declaration that was not unique to people in the 13 colonies, okay? Second, except for the Alien Sedition Act, which Bruce has already pointed out numerous times was never used to deport, quote, an illegal alien, okay? There was no such concept as an illegal alien. We didn't even have passports when we founded the country, So people came to the country. The only difference was in people coming here, and everybody who came here had rights of habeas corpus and due process, because we didn't even, certain people had rights that allowed them to vote, and certain people were not allowed to vote, but basically people could come, get a job, and enjoy the rights that everybody who was in our jurisdiction enjoyed, okay? There was no real concept of an illegal alien. People were non-citizens, but they were not illegal aliens. The only thing that survived the Alien and Sedition Act, were the Alien Enemies Act, and that's pretty clear in stating that if we have a whole bunch of people in the country from a country that we are currently at war with, then maybe that those people here might align themselves with their home country, and they could prove a threat, to the security of the country, in a point in time when we didn't have a standing army, we didn't have a police force. I mean, we had a whole bunch of people where everybody had guns. So, I mean, if you look at the circumstances of society, at I think the first police department we had was in Boston around 1840, 1850. Okay, if you look at when the 14th Amendment was ratified, the 14th Amendment was ratified before we ever took any effort to actually distinguish, except for that short period of time in the Alien Sedition Act, to actually classify anyone as being, illegal or unwelcome. So if you look at the history of the country at that point in time, we never distinguished between rights and never segregated a whole bunch of people, predicated upon this stuff. So for anybody who believes it, they either got to be a moron, they got to be an idiot, or they're just reflecting a personal bias because they're racist or prejudiced in whatever way, and they want to project their biases, their racism, onto society as a whole, and they do that without any knowledge whatsoever.
Yeah, if I could just fortify what you've said, Jeffrey, there are two additional points worth mentioning. One, the Declaration of Independence listed as a grievance against King George III. He wasn't permitting enough migrants, enough aliens to come in. That was one of the grievances. And then when you look at the Constitution when it's ratified, it empowers Congress to establish rules for naturalization.
Right.
It doesn't say anything at all about deporting. Naturalization, because they anticipated, okay, you're here, and Congress will provide the rules for you to become a naturalized citizen, not deport anyone. But that underscores the act that this idea that we're going to be kicking people out of the country the time the Constitution was ratified was absurd. We're welcoming them, other than you come with a contagious disease.
Right. This is such an important conversation. I just really want to stress that for people listening. Right now, this seems to be like the pinnacle of a lot of what's happening and a lot of the rapid, I guess, lack of acknowledgement of our inherent rights. But I want to point a couple things out that it's important to highlight that regardless of where this may feel in certain parts of the conversation, because of the way the partisanship has been built, that this might feel one way or the other partisan. It's really not. It's about the fundamental reality of the Constitution, the constitutional law, and that's the way this process is supposed to work. And I want to cite back that I think we mentioned before, Maybury versus Madison, which is that if it is repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void. And that's why any amendments after the Bill of Rights, if you look like 14th Amendment, for example, nothing is actually repugnant to the previous the Bill of Rights and forward. And so the point is that other things that may come into pass, there are laws in the books, I would argue right now, that are technically repugnant to the Constitution. That just shows you that we have gone far away from that. But that's why there's a lot of things that have been added since. It's not like they were political in nature. They're really just an addition to that whole idea. And so it's important to see all this is not partisan, regardless of whether it may feel that way to people seeing immigration one way or the other today, And I also would, it's interesting to point out today that it's a valid concern with a lot of what's going on today. And you could even argue all the way back then that there, like you even highlighted, there's a point in time in which you could argue that there may be a concern about some foreign country doing something, or just even people in this country acting illegally in an organized way against the government, right? Or even just against other people in the country. That's all to say that there's some cases and circumstances where you might argue that there needs to be more concern, but that is what I'm trying to highlight, was why due process is always important, because you don't know for sure that they are what the government's claiming they are or what somebody else is. And if you remove the possibility of them having their rights to have evidence presented, right, to have your accuser stand before you, all these things that we know are foundational, then you just get a power structure that says bad guy, remove them, which is what we're seeing today, with no way to verify those things. And that's how this all comes back around. Now, I think it's really important that we recognize that, the idea of what's happening with these illegal immigrants today, or the green card holders, or the visa card holders, or what seems to be potentially Americans right now, that all of this comes back to that core point, that we have a process already for how we flush these things out. And that's what's being skipped over. And if you want to prove that these things are correct, that these are all terrorists, then that's why you would go through that process to verify that, so nobody would have any question. But that's what's being removed using something that they know people are ready to attack.
Just to add what Ryan said, I think I want to point this out, and Jeffrey, then you come in. And what underscores the importance of what you said is our experience with 120,000 Japanese Americans in World War II.
Right.
All they're detained. They all said, they're going to be spies and espionage agents for Emperor Hirohito. 100% wrong. All of them were loyal. Indeed, many volunteered out of the concentration camps to fly for our Air Force. They were the most bemedaled Air Force squadron in all of World War II over Italy. Not a single one was disloyal. And afterwards, 40 years afterwards, in the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, the Congress apologized, said we got it all wrong, this was unconstitutional, and paid reparations. But they got it 100% wrong, 120,000 wrong decisions, because they did no due process.
Yeah, I think, Bruce, I was not going to make that point you just made, but I want to emphasize the point in the sense of the last time prior to Trump, the point you're making, that we used the Alien Enemies Act, we viewed the application of it as a national disgrace, okay? So much of a national disgrace that Congress acknowledged it officially as a national disgrace, and further acknowledged it by providing remuneration for the people who were victims of a national disgrace.
Yeah.
So really, the last time it was applied, that it was not considered, a national disgrace, maybe officially, is in World War I. And I don't know how much it was actually applied in World War I, but what we did in World War II as a nation, the word Ryan used, was we found repugnant. Okay, so and that's what we should think about the application of the Alien Enemies Act today. Is repugnant. Okay, and it's a straw man argument to say that because you want due process, that means you want people, that you're aiding and abetting criminality. Okay, that's the phony argument that they make, is that because everyone has due process rights. The Constitution is it's under rare conditions under which those rights can be stripped, which is basically the Alien Enemies Act. And that's something that the last time we used it within the last 100 years, we described as a national disgrace. Okay, and we provided remuneration for it. Okay, and how absurd this is. If we think about defining something as an invasion or a declared war, okay, we have troops in Syria today. How many countries do we have troops in? Right. Okay, where we are trying, and we train insurgents, we finance insurgents, Okay, we're financing and training and sending weapons to insurgents to overthrow the existing government. Yet we don't call that an invasion, and we don't call that a war, because if it really was an invasion, then they would have to go to Congress and get authorization from Congress, because if not, it's an impeachable offense. So if we have to take a look at our own definition of what constitutes a war and an invasion, we had a president, Trump, again, and I don't mean to be this partisan. He has talked about annihilating Houthis and Gazans, okay? I don't know how we annihilate a group of people without doing it through a war, okay? So clearly, if we're threatening to annihilate a group of people, that seems to be, we're doing it by a declaration of war. Yet, is anyone going to Congress to declare war? We seem to be very willing to go in and annihilate people, bomb people, and claim that's not an invasion or an act, because again, if it was, Congress would have to authorize it.
Yeah.
So,
Jeffrey, let me jump in here, because I want to give a specific.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I want to give a specific illustration of exactly your reasoning. It came up with regard to Obama's attack on Libya in 2011, and the Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, was testifying, and he was asked, well, if somebody else, as to why this wasn't, whether this was war, and he was asked by a member of Congress, well, if another country shot a missile into the United States, into New York City, would that be an act of war? And he said, of course it would. We would annihilate them, right? Well, we do that every day, not just the Houthis, everywhere else in the world. We drop missiles, wherever. Yeah, in Somalia, we do it. We do it in Libya still. We do it wherever we feel like it. And you're exactly right. Why isn't this issue less about the disclosure to the Atlantic and the reporter Goldberg about the military plan? Why was the EU have authority to do this anyway? When did we ever declare war against the Houthis? We don't even have not only a declaration of war, we don't even have an authorization to use military force,
right,
which is kind of a delegation. It's nothing. And Congress has two hearings. Is it on the war power? It's being usurped, the most important power in the Constitution? No, the war power isn't even mentioned. They talk about, well, it was a leak and it exposed XYZ. We shouldn't have even been talking about a military attack until we had a declaration of war. Aside from the fact that I don't believe a single American has ever gone to sleep worried that the Houthis are going to attack the United States. And our national security depends upon defeating the Houthis.
Well, it's important to point out here. I was just saying Sana'a, seeing as how they just bombed, claiming it's a Houthi capital, literally the capital of Yemen, the most residential packed civilian location, taking down residential buildings. They're claiming 50 mostly children and women were killed. This is obviously a war crime, but see back to the signal chat, since we've started with that, I genuinely think that what you just said right there nails exactly what it's really about. That's not to say that there weren't people involved in that chat that maybe didn't know they were being looked at. I don't know, because it seems pretty embarrassing for them. But the reality being that you just said, Bruce, that instead of talking about, is it okay that we just murdered a bunch of civilians in the middle of a capital of Yemen because we claim they're all pirates, as we're literally acting like pirates, or instead of we're talking about whether the leaked information was wrong, whether it was classified, whether that should have happened. And to me, that's organized. Like to your point, if these people were going to, we're being told right now from a partisan conversation that the Democrats are out in every possible way to go after Trump's administration. Well, here is your silver platter, right? You could, everything's for you right there. You could have impeached for that crime, except the problem is every one of the presidents before him have done the same. Yeah. It just shows you a coordination to deviate the conversation from what's really going on. And I think that's top down.
Yeah, and I think also what that shows, and I call this, we have the culture of empire. We're in an empire bubble. And this started back at least around 1900. We decided to swap and make a Faustian bargain. Let's be empire, dominate the world. We don't have any laws because you need a Caesar to run the empire. The heck with liberty being our glory. The right to march to your own drummer, the right to aspire to whatever you want to do with little government interference as possible, except to protect you from predators. We have gone down that road, Republican, Democrat, ever since. Inches up each time. Each administration never recedes because no president ever surrenders that power back. We got to get this straight. No, the United States was not created to dominate the world. It was created to make liberty the glory of a country, that justice is our end, not domination and power. And we got to get the individual flourishes. We win. whether we're in any other country at all. I don't really care whether we're the world leader or not. Other than by example, that's irrelevant to our aspirations as a country. Read the Declaration of Independence and you'll understand why.
Well, I want to comment on the chats because I have my own Substack now. I think I call it Authenticity, and I'm writing on a lot of topics, and I wrote about this, and I went through all the chats, as I'm sure the two of you also had. And what can you learn by actually reading the chats and not just focusing on the content of, was it classified, unclassified? How did Goldberg get into the conversation? So those are all distractions. The first thing I pointed out, in my Substack is that one of the first things I pointed out is, while this discussion was going on, Trump was not even a party to the conversation. He apparently was on the golf course. Okay, so the other thing is that all of them on it agreed there was no urgency to taking this action. Okay. Then when they talk about what the goal is of it is, Trump said the goal is to send a message. So it was not really. So on the one hand, they say, well, we got to open up the sea lanes, the Red Sea, so people can get through, the Suez Canal rather than going around Africa through the Cape of Good Horn or whatever to take a much longer route. That ultimately no one believed that this one strike would open up the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Okay, so it was a single act where the only objective seemed to be to send the message by killing people randomly. Okay, so we didn't significantly degrade the Houthis' capabilities. And what's the evidence that we didn't do it? Okay, the people are not taking, our own flagships are not taking the route through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal. So on the one hand, we stated an objective, and that's what we told the American people, and what was a success? This is how disgusting I think the American people are. Sorry to say that. What we were successful at. We were successful at demolishing residential buildings. Great success at that. We should applaud ourselves for that. Okay. So if that was the objective, was to randomly kill innocent people, yeah, we had succeeded. If our objective was to randomly destroy a bunch of infrastructure in Yemen, we succeeded. Okay. So if this is just a wanted random act of violence against a group of people, because we're sending a message that we can randomly kill people just about anywhere we want. Okay. As long as it doesn't offend Putin. Okay. But anywhere else that we can, or China or Mr. Xi, but anywhere else, when we feel that we have a pipsqueak, we'll show force for the purpose of showing force. And that seems to be the only objective because they declared success. Okay. So given the fact that the sea lanes of the Red Sea is not open, okay, that ships are not passing through, that the ships are still avoiding the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, if they've defined success, then they're admitting that their only objective was to kill a bunch of people. Okay. So
but
let's be honest, let them get together and say, and if you look at the conversation, okay, basically they're all trying to figure out what Trump wants, and they're not even sure what Trump wants. That's why apparently Stephen Miller had to come in and say, yeah, I think Trump gave us the green light. So none of them are outside of J.D. Vance, no one is giving an opinion. This is the best of the best of the best of the best of the best national security team. Okay, I bet you we could put a DEI team together that would be smarter than these group of people. Okay,
it's even worse, Jeffrey.
None of them had an opinion except for J.D. Vance. Only one person had an opinion on that call. Okay,
yeah, Jeffrey, it's worse than what you said. You cannot kill people without giving birth to resentment that's going to come back at some point and haunt you.
Right.
You can't kill people. So what this does, not only gratuitously destroys, innocent civilians in Yemen, it builds the dynamic that at some point is going to come back and haunt us. It's called blowback. We saw blowback in 9/11. That is what we're generating, whether it comes earlier or later. You can't kill people and not create resentment and plans and desire for revenge. It's like built into the DNA. That's how stupid this stuff is. And that's why I've described our foreign policy as searching the globe for hornets' nests, smashing the hornets' nests open, and then complaining when the hornets want to try to sting you and then asking for trillions of dollars. That's crazy. We need to stop breaking open the hornet's nest and just focus on invincible self-defense. Other people need to take care of their problems. We can influence by example, but that's all.
And I think it's obvious to point out that it's not necessarily about just causing conflict. I think that's part of something in a larger agenda, but it's because they covet the land the hornet's nest is on, right? And it's about creating the justification for them to, they come out and attack you for bombing their location, and you use that to justify taking that. And I think it's important to come back to Yemen to recognize it's very clear what this is all about, right? I mean, clearly this is about, and Yemen's been very clear about this. The Houthis have been very clear. It's about stopping the ongoing genocide. And every time there's a ceasefire where there's a potential for something to stop, they stop their action, right? And it's also important to point out, and unless there's new information that I missed as of yesterday, the same with the Truman that they launched missiles at again. Have we seen these ships sink? Have there even been reports of casualties? As far as I understand, there's been none. And the reason for that is because they're telling you that this is not about trying to sink ships or be pirates or take anything. It's about deterrence. And by the way, that's what real deterrence looks like when you're not just murdering and bombing entire countries and claiming that's deterrence. It's actually blowback, as Bruce is pointing out. But I want to make a couple points on this. Which Jeffrey, which you were pointing out, Jeffrey, which is in regard to the timing of it, the location. I think it was you, Jeffrey, but the point was that they're bombing this location, or rather the single chat is like blithely discussing the person walking into a building, right? And then the justification being, well, we know he's the bad guy, which of course we get no real evidence around that. But as somebody pointed out online, okay, so we're able to pinpoint target this person walking into a building full of people. Why didn't they bomb him before he walked into a building full of people? Like, I don't think it's really about actually going after him. I think it's about creating.
They described that Ryan as the missile mastermind walking into his girlfriend's building.
Yes.
So I guess they wanted the girlfriend to die as well.
Or a lot of
somebody who is girlfriend of a missile mastermind obviously deserves to die. And clearly all their neighbors also deserve to die. So it's guilt by proximity. Okay. We're not happy just killing the mastermind. Okay. Yeah. Anyone within a certain distance of that mastermind, clearly would not be in that distance of the mastermind if they didn't support or are not active supporters of that missile mastermind. Okay, the same thing now that we're doing in this country.
Jeffrey's being sarcastic, by the way, just in case you guys are. No, I'm just pointing out you're being sarcastic about what you were saying right there, in case people weren't picking up on that.
Yes, exactly. I'm being sarcastic, but it's the same type of stupidity now that's conflating people protesting against genocide in Gaza as being defined as supporters of Hamas, rather than people who are against genocide. Okay, so that's the conflation we're doing now. I read today some Iranian was whisked off today in Alabama. We had the Tufts woman yesterday whisked off. Is there any explanation? Okay, any finding, any plans to overthrow the government? Okay, any direct ties to Hamas? Any of this stuff? No, we're now defining. We're now criminalizing. I'm sure Trump would like to criminalize even American citizens protesting against Israel, but maybe he'll eventually get there. When he and Johnson dissolve federal courts. So and then after they dissolve federal courts, then he could go stack the Supreme Court. So then he could put Matt Gaetz and Teddy Cruz and a bunch of other lunatics, and add about 10 justices to the Supreme Court, and they'll rubble stamp, everything he does, and there will be no constitution.
Let me interject, Jeffrey, about the hysteria, because it reminds me, it goes way back to the communist hysteria, after World War II McCarthyism. And there was a tale told at the time. There are policemen in New York. There's a big demonstration against the mayor, and the policemen are batting and using their batons to slap the demonstrators. And one stands, "Hey, I'm an anti-communist. I'm an anti-communist." And the policeman retorts, "I don't care what kind of communist you are. We're getting all of you," right? And that's kind of where we are now. It's just completely mindless. They have a quota that's supposed to meet whatever it is, so they just grab you if you're nearby. We got to meet the quota. We'll call you an illegal alien. We'll call you unpatriotic. We'll call you Hamas or a terrorist. There's no evidence.
That's the most perverse incentive is to sit back and say, I don't want to hear excuses. Okay. You got to find a number of people. So if you tell people, you find these people or you're fired, they're going to find the people. Okay. They don't care whether it's a good case or a bad case. They're just going to find the people because they don't want to be fired. They want these people hunting people down, and they want people to get the sense of pressure that if they don't find them, they got to invent them because, of these consequences. But, I think, I think what's going on now, on these campuses of us trying to squash, dissent, especially, giving one group, Jews a privilege on campus and equating protesting, against, Israeli genocide as being, it should be pro-American to protest against genocide anywhere exists in the world. And pretty much by the behavior of both Bibi and Trump, they're clearly supportive because they keep referring to annihilating people, and their plan for, the Gaza is to forcibly evict everyone. So I assume, I guess that might be, Bruce would know better. I assume that's a human rights violation.
It is. It's a clear. It is a international.
Forcibly evict them.
It would be called the crime against humanity under international law. And on the genocide issue, Jeffrey and Ryan, we should remember that we are applauding the fact that the International Criminal Court has accused Putin of genocide in Ukraine. Right? That's a bad genocide, but some of them are good genocides, like in Gaza. I mean, really, it's utterly. It just shows you how partisan and unprincipled these ideas are.
Absolutely, but
Bruce, you're the one. I just want to remind you, Bruce, you're the one who has a lawsuit filed specifically with respect to the violation of the ley law. And the fact is, there are limitations in us sending arms if they're used in a way that violates that is a human rights violation.
Yes, it's been around for 28 years, and they have a special unit in the State Department. Says you can ever find Israel in violation of the Leahy law. So they haven't done it in 28 years, and we know exactly why. That's a political decision, and we hope. I mean, our biggest challenge, Jeffrey and Ryan, is getting standing. It's a technical issue that requires you to find somebody who's about ready to be hit by a U.S. bomb dropped by the IDF, and then they can run and be a plaintiff from Gaza. It's a challenging issue, but we hope that we can get the merits actually addressed here.
I was just going to add to the idea what you're saying about the genocide aspect, that it's clear, like it doesn't. The point you're making, it's irrelevant for those out there whether you think Russia did or not, right? Yeah. The point is the consistency of logic, and if you can argue that what Russia did and even everything they claim Russia did, which is a lot of which is actually inaccurate. And compare that to what you can literally prove that even Israel's admitted that they've done in Gaza, and it's night and day, right? So it's obvious that there's a willful logical inconsistency. But I wanted to bring it back to the point you mentioned, Jeffrey, about the American citizen point, about where that's coming to. Now, it's interesting, all of what we've seen. And as you were even referencing, the Iranian student just recently, or the tough student, or I went over about 4 others yesterday. These are people, I mean, the broader question I was asking on the show is like, in some cases, you have people who are here illegally. Okay, and that's a crime, right? So if someone's here illegally, by the way, we already have laws to which to use to deport them, and that includes due process. But what's interesting is the question to ask is this what we thought they were going to go after? Is this what we got? I mean, isn't the conversation about H-1B and the rest that it's about the right caliber of person? Okay, so we're talking about in Tufts, a doctoral student, right? Or rather, excuse me, that one also a doctoral or high-level education. Then you got one from Brown University. It was a doctoral student. Now you've got an Iranian person who's all, I mean, there are doctors, there are people at high level education that have been here for years in some cases. Okay. And then a lot of them are in the process of either having a green card or in the process of asylum, all these different aspects, many of which are here legally. And I think that's the important point, because it started with Khalil technically. And I think that was important and trying to set that tone for why people with just green cards, it doesn't matter, we can revoke it whenever we want. But then it went over to the Venezuelan aspect. And I don't know if you guys have followed that closely, but there's an example of somebody who had already been given asylum. I think it's a 22-year-old who had just kind of the wrong tattoo. His mother claims he has nothing to do with these groups, and most of the evidence suggests that, most of which didn't even have criminal records. And this guy was here legally, and they swept him up too. Right. And so, and then that boils over into just people here legally. And I wanted to bring it to the point of Americans, as you mentioned, because I have the clip down there. I don't know if you guys can play it. It's only like 30 seconds. But this is where Donald Trump just literally said publicly in the Oval Office that the people scratching Tesla cars, and yes, there were some federal crimes as well with Molotov cocktails, but most of which are keying Teslas, are people that are now domestic terrorists, and they can get 20 years and be sent to El Salvador. If you guys saw this clip, if you guys can play it, that would be great. It's really short.
I don't know how to do it, but if you know
That's
how
okay.
to do it, play it.
Johnny in the background, I don't think he can play it, but either way, the point is,
I just want to thank him. He's going through a lot, what they're doing to him. And these people are going to be caught, and they're going to be caught, and they're going to be prosecuted. And from what they tell me, I see this just by watching your programs and reading the news, but from what they tell me, they could get 20 years in jail, and they'll get it. I'll tell you, there's going to be no leniency, and there'll be no pardons. I can tell you that right
And
now.
you said this morning 20 years in jail, and then maybe they get. You said this morning 20 years in jail, and then maybe they'll go to one of these prisons in El Salvador. Do you think, with the way that the judges have been issuing injunctions, it would be easier or harder to send these Tesla domestic terrorists to a jail in El Salvador than these MS-13 or Trendy arrival guys?
Well, I view these people as terrorists just like others. These are, when I looked at those showrooms burning and those cars, not one or two, like 7, 8, 10 burning, exploding all over the place. These are terrorists.
that's got to be one of the most chilling things I've seen. I mean, think about what he just said. Go ahead, Bruce. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
No, it is flagrantly unconstitutional to deport an American citizen. It doesn't matter how many crimes they committed, how terrible they were. And that is what caused a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals here in the District of Columbia to remark, in conjunction with the treatment of those who were tried to be deported under the Alien Enemies Act of El Salvador, she remarked, even the Nazis got more due process than you gave them.
Wow.
Really? So we are giving them less due process than the Nazis who were detained under the Alien Enemies Act in World War II. That's where we are.
It's probably because they gave them jobs under Operation Paperclip after that happened for NASA, but that's a whole other conversation. But that's
that clearly. I mean, one is, why do I think some of these people? I'm being somewhat sarcastic and somewhat not. Why are these graduate students being targeted? Because they're intelligent. Okay, so what do we fear? We fear intelligent people who can think for themselves and have the courage to speak up. So that's a dangerous person to a despot. That's a dangerous person to a brain-dead nationalist, okay, who is an idolater in the sense is that they adore the flag, but have no comprehension of what that flag actually represents. So they're idolaters. So I don't think the foundation of the Constitution. I don't think George Washington and Ben Franklin and James Madison got together and said, we want a nation of idolaters. They don't need a document. All we want them to do is, whenever George passes by, they should bow down and kiss the ring. And when they pass through and see the flag, they should get an orgasm. And that's active patriotism. Okay, so they've loved liberty. Okay. Liberty was what they thought. They were designing a system that would promote liberty in the country. And of course, they realized that the only way to sustain a country with liberty is to have intelligent people who are not only intelligent and thoughtful, not only rational and logical, but are virtuous. So, and many low information voters might be, decent people. But they're poorly informed, and we need a well-informed public, and we don't have that, and that was a prerequisite, and that's why people like George Washington, others, talked about education. That's why Thomas Jefferson claimed the greatest achievement he made in his life. The guy who was the third president, the guy who organized the Lewis and Clark expedition, the guy who bought Louisiana. And all the things that he accomplished in his life, to him, his greatest accomplishment was the founding of the University of Virginia. So education, that was important to them because they knew that was the future of the country. Was the fact is that we needed to be enlightened people, okay? And so we could have logical debate. And I thought when I was a freshman, and I was at the University of Chicago, they had a program called the Pearl Program. Politics, economics, rhetoric, and law. And why did this program exist? It existed from this group called the Committee on Social Thought. This program was patterned after what Franklin's assertion that every citizen needed to have knowledge of. They said the only way we could sustain a republic is if people were aware of politics, they were knowledgeable in economics, that they were skillful at rhetoric, so we could have good conversations and debates over the topics, and that law was the infrastructure of society. So this was something not to prepare people for a profession. It was the knowledge that they expected all citizens would have to be a good citizen. So we have a country of lousy citizens because they don't have the knowledge that if you want to preserve a republic, they're irresponsible in investing in the type of knowledge, for information. But and what they really are threatened about is people who have ideas that they can't debate, that they can't think through and counter them through debate, discussion, discourse. So those are frightening to them, fearful to them, and so those are the people that they want to get rid of. So that's the problem with these people, because most of these people come to universities, for foreign schools. Most of them are graduate students. A high percentage of them get PhDs.
Very high percentage. And let me just add to compare where we were in World War II. There's a very famous case called Barnett versus the West Virginia State Board of Education, in which the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, you cannot condition public education on a student's willingness to salute the flag. They have a right, this was a Jehovah's Witness, not to salute the flag. That when you start to exterminate dissent, then you soon start to exterminate dissenters. And that the freedom of speech doesn't depend upon the outcome of any election. Even if Trump won like 49 states like Nixon in 1972, you can't get a public mandate to flout the Constitution. You can't get a public mandate to flout freedom of speech. You can't get a public mandate to compel that Jehovah's Witnesses to salute the flag. The people got to understand that. That's what freedom is about. It's what liberty is about. It's not about power. It's about justice and liberty to pursue your own ambitions with your own ideas and learn by trial and error.
Yeah, these are excellent points to bring up. And let's not forget that the people, let's just take Columbia in general, despite how aggressively misrepresented that entire thing was. Let's not forget that it was put on by Jewish Voices for Peace, that it was alongside Holocaust survivors and Muslims and Christians. Again, it gets called this anti-Semitic pit. But the point is that there were people that were arrested there on all sides, but specifically on the Palestinian protest side, that did commit violence. Right. So yet they overlook people that actually committed violent acts that could have been much easier to, still no due process, but still could have gone through that same process and had one more excuse. Instead, as you're pointing out, Jeffrey and Bruce, they went after people that were, that didn't wear masks, that were out there in the front, that were highly educated, that were very peaceful, that in no way said anything they claim. And I think you're right. I think it's because these are the biggest threat to the obvious crumbling narrative around this whole conversation. And that's alarming, and then again, going back to the brazen threat to say, well, if we decide you're terrorists, we'll send you. I mean, even just to say, as you said, Bruce, to send them to a prison would be that'd be insane. But an El Salvadorian concentration camp. I mean, I just can't even wrap my mind around how they're not marching through the streets.
Another thing, Ryan, Bruce, is absurd about this is that this is specific to you can go and bomb Ford facilities or GM facilities or Hyundai facilities. Yeah. Just don't do it. Just don't do it but what do you expect from the guy who used the White House to sell Tesla cars?
Yeah.
So, it's clear, it should be clear that they're protecting, Elon Musk and giving him privileges and perks that few of anyone else really gets. And, and it's, again, sad that so many of this, MAGA mob, supports the concept of giving preferential treatment to Musk, over other people. It's just sad. And I don't know how anyone thinks that that's an act of patriotism where you're treating one person. Supposedly, these are the same people who want to end discrimination. Okay. So the people who are complaining about boycotts against Tesla are the same people who said, go woke, go broke. So what's the difference? Right. I don't like Disney, so I boycott Disney. But people who don't like best Tesla apparently don't have the right to boycott Tesla. The boycott rights only are conferred upon MAGA people to be used against non-MAGA people. But anyone else who boycotts something against the MAGA interest is a domestic terrorist.
Yeah, and just think of this irony, Jeffrey and Ryan. The Boston Tea Party. Yeah, we were boycotting British tea. That was our origins, was boycott, right? You know, the Irish, the boycott of the landlords in Great Britain. So boycott is a time-honored way in which you voice your opposition to something. It isn't using force and violence, just saying, I'm not going to patronize X, Y, or Z because I think that they're advancing causes that you oppose. Yeah, that's boycotts is standard American as apple pie, and it's been used from the outset. Certain people would not patronize slave states, until the 13th Amendment. Is that going to be opposed? The abolitionists were engaged in wrongful conduct. The other thing I would add, Jeffrey, with regard to the totally uneven, warped enforcement of law, after the signal disclosures about the attack on the Houthis. Well, this is an espionage. Whether it's classified information, the Espionage Act applies just to national defense information. It's broader than simple classified information that's disclosed. So this is the act that we're using to keep Ed Snowden in Russia and Moscow. It's just terrible, terrible. It's such an important statute. And then we have the statement today by the Attorney General, no, we're actually not going to look at it. Because why? Because the Trump administration were the people who are disclosing this information to the Atlantic and to a reporter. And I can guarantee you, somebody else does something, there'll be a time in the administration, they'll go after some reporter under the Espionage Act if there's not Trump administration officials involved and say, see, this is even-handed, colorblind justice.
Yeah, but Bruce, it's worse than that. We shouldn't conflate the reporter being there. The fact is that the conversation should have never been on Signal. Okay, whether the reporter there was not, we only know about the conversation because the reporter was there. But that doesn't mean that just a week before, the Pentagon put out a warning on the use of Signal. So you would assume that the Secretary of Defense, the head of NSA, and the head of National and ODNI, whatever that Tulsi is head of, you would assume that they would be aware of this, given the fact that this is their basic responsibility. So you'd assume to be aware. We don't know, and more people should ask this question: is these conversations are supposed to be logged and recorded, and we don't know if they were using Signal as a way of having the conversations disappear, so there would be no public record of these conversations. So we don't know if that's the reason why they were using Signal. They didn't. We don't really know why they had to make that decision at that moment, since none of them said there was urgency of time. So we don't know when they all could have gotten back from their trips, where someone in Saudi Arabia, Tulsi didn't seem to be sure exactly where she was, somewhere in Asia. So she wasn't really sure, and she had a vague recollection of the conversation. So she looked horrible, and she really looked very unqualified. I don't know who really left that conversation looking qualified. Maybe the person most qualified, even though I don't disagree, even though I don't agree with his ideology. But I think the only one that left, at least some positive image of himself was Vance, that at least tried to advance an opinion, and have some thought. But everybody else looked pretty stupid. All they were doing were people saying, Trump said do this, and they said, jump, and they're all saying how high. And a conversation like that, I guess to some of them, was so meaningless they don't even remember where they were when they had the conversation and what they were talking about.
But what about J.D. Vance, though? This is important, Jeffrey, because it relates to our entire culture of political cravenness. Even J.D. Vance said, but don't worry, if everybody's for it, I'll go along with it too. Said, okay. That really courage,
But nobody was for it. They were just doing it because they thought Trump wanted to do it. Okay.
No, I understand, but they said he said I'll go along. Yeah. Yeah,
But you're right.
Guys, I think the biggest point here is like, and look, I think there's clearly aspects of this, and this is just obviously all our opinion. I don't think anybody really knows at the end of the day that there's some people in this that came out looking pretty silly. Like even like you pointed out, Jeffrey, if you looked at Tulsi Gabbard, I mean, she was physically uncomfortable with having to like deflect, and she looked really stupid. You know, something's pulling these strings, whether it's internal cabinet, like, you know, maybe just Trump saying you can't say these because it makes us look bad. Somebody's making them not, you know, put themselves out there as the one clearly hiding something. Like it's really obvious to me. But so for me, the bigger point is this is the conversation being had by and large, other than the point we started with, that the illegal bombing of Yemen, killing massive amounts of civilians, or even the idea of, you know, the fact that they're so blithely, or even the point you made, Jeffrey, like that they're having these conversations basically off the record, which that's supposed to be a crime. And none of that's really being addressed. It's being kind of couched in this one aspect. And I think that's kind of the bigger point. Maybe it was leaked by somebody else who wanted to expose this, who is not in the cabinet. I mean, I don't really know, but I think it's interesting that that is overtaking all the conversation. And I think that's kind of why. But
it is, Ryan. And the reason why it overtakes the conversation again is because we live in this empire bubble. Hey, you know, we can't ask the real question to say we need to get rid of this empire. We need to restore liberty as the glory, downsize all of this. It's totally making us less safe and at staggering expense and committing war crimes. This is ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. Most people in the United States probably can't even find Yemen on a map.
Right.
No, why are we risking a single life or spending
I think it was Vance who made the comment, the fact that the messaging had to be tight because people don't even know who the Houthis are.
Right. That just became a Fox talking point.
What was that comment? People don't really know who we're doing this, why we're doing it. So what do we focus on? We focus on the fact is we're fighting for freedom and Biden sucks. That's crazy.
It's crazy.
That messaging. Okay. All we need to say, if in doubt, Biden sucks. Okay.
Yeah, right. Blame the Democrats.
Whatever happens, Biden sucks.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
you're right.
That's their fallback. Let's go back to Biden and saying how he sucked. Okay.
It works though, Jeffrey. It works. People fall for it. As long as you go bad Democrats, everyone blinds themselves to how obviously wrong it is. Even if though 30 seconds ago they were all screaming the virtue of the Constitution. You know, it's crazy how easy it is to trick some people, you know.
Yeah, but it is. Well, it goes back to Goebbels in the Third Reich. Yeah, you tell a big lie, not over and over and over again. He says that people will start to believe it, and that's basically what's happening here. At least with regard to the MAGA folks.
Who did Goebbels say were people who would not believe it? The intellectuals.
Right.
The high information people will not be fooled, but they will be intimidated by the mob that will shut them up. Okay.
Wow. Isn't that exactly hard? That's a scary image of where we are right now.
And that's what's happening in this country. Okay.
Man.
Bruce, there's a question. So I like to always encourage people to ask questions. So when they do it, I want to ask the questions that on behalf of the people that ask one, because I want to keep encouraging people to ask questions. So I think this one is best directed for you. Somebody asked if they shouldn't have been using Signal, how should they have had this conversation? So could you explain how these conversations usually go when the government is going to take military action, you know, against the third party?
So first, they shouldn't have conversation except as to we need to go to Congress and get a declaration of war, or some authorization. But putting that aside, most of these meetings occur in what's called SCIFs. They're special rooms that are created simply to ensure that no one is overhearing anything that's said. A special compartmentalized information facility. And in the SCIFs, it's ordinarily face-to-face. You're not talking with 17 different time zones. If it's really that important, everyone is together on that score. And there are all sorts of SCIFs that are created that are convenient for people. And and because, as you pointed out, Ryan and Jeffrey, there was no urgency about this. There's no reason why you shouldn't have waited if you needed to find a SCIF and have your discussion there, because that's the most secure environment you can operate in. Not on Signal.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce. It's also, the point is it's being recorded internally and secret, but it's also being documented so we can later refer to it in Congress, for example, right?
Yeah, that's right. Part of the Federal Records Act. You have a complete. Now that probably would be classified, and maybe it's not released immediately, but can be shared with Congress in executive session or something like that. But SCIFs, when I was in the Reagan administration, the idea that this would not occur in a SCIF would be preposterous.
So during the Reagan administration, how many of these meetings that were required to do something like that, like in a SCIF, was Reagan frequently absent from the meetings, or was he usually present at the meetings?
Well, he was there on some occasions, for sure, but most of them, oftentimes they were the deputies' meetings. But he was the one who decided whether we were going to retaliate against Gaddafi. You remember after the discotheque bombing in West Germany. So he was fully engaged, but there were some slip-ups, and that's what caused the Iran-Contra deal, where he was excluded because some people thought he was older and he wasn't engaged as he should have been. That's very hazardous, and that's a lesson not to do that. You want to have the number one decider there, present and listening and making the decision.
That was when we took out I don't remember who the people, Obama was responsible for the actions he take was when they were in the Situation Room, wherever having this was Obama.
Osama bin Laden, yeah. It's Osama bin Laden.
Was Obama on the golf course or at the disco or shooting hoops in the lounge, or was he was he present and involved? I think the photos show that he was present and actively engaged in it.
Yes. And these things, I mean, when we're talking about life and death,
but I want to ask one more point. Isn't it frightening that apparently this decision was taken without the explicit approval of the president? Again, if you look at this, Trump never got on the call and said, go ahead. They were all guessing what his intentions are, but we don't have any evidence that he actually authorized this.
Well, it's important to point this out. Just like the last administration, he made this decision where he basically delegated that authority to the heads of military, heads of state. And remember, it was the Moab, the largest non-nuclear bomb, was released in Afghanistan when he was reportedly eating cake at Mar-a-Lago, and that was publicly reported. He said he didn't even know. And again, in this administration, he made that point. He said that these people know what they're doing. So he's delegated that responsibility to people at these heads of the positions, heads of military, and I find that to be insane.
Yeah, it is. It's irresponsible too. He's elected to make those decisions. As Harry Truman said, the buck stops here. He keeps saying, I have this mandate. Well, you got a mandate for you to make the decision, not to delegate it to Elon Musk or anybody else. They weren't elected to be president. You are. You need to decide. I mean, who knows? At some point, we're going to have an AI decision to go bomb. Could be China. We end up in a nuclear war or something.
I think that's already happening. I legitimately think that's already happening. There's evidence to back that up too, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
So Ryan, Bruce, what other topics do you want to, in about the 30 minutes we have remaining, what other topics would you like to discuss during the time we have remaining to discuss? Because there's really a lot of topics to discuss. So what else is on your mind, Ryan?
We could go in that direction if you want, Bruce and Jeffrey, about the artificial intelligence overlap. I mean, I think it's very relevant in the same conversation space, especially as we see, Palantir involved. You have Israel using Lavender and Habsara and these different AI powered tools around exactly what we're talking about. And you tell me if you guys want to talk about this. I think it's interesting because Yemen and the use of these tools is already, at least in some way, being demonstrated from the GSA. I mean, I think Conley called this out in Congress and basically said, there's evidence already showing that you're using privacy, or rather personal privacy information, to train your AI models. No one's responding to this. So wherever you guys like to go, I think that's a super.
I think that, Brian, where that point is a point that I've also made as well, but I think it's very, very important. Right now, we know the name of the game for AI is data, information.
Yeah.
And Musk's AI agent, Grok, seems to have an informational advantage because we really don't know all this data he's aggregating. Because to the extent that if he's using these, to the extent that he's probably using these AI models to help make decisions for the government, all this work is making the AI smarter. And that's work that he has a monopoly on, because this information is not being shared with anyone but his AI agent, to the best of our knowledge. If the government disclosed more, we would know more, but the government is not disclosing. So we really don't know what information he has that's building up Grok, for purposes we don't even know how they'll be used, because again, there's no disclosure, on any of this stuff, and how much he will personally profit from the use of this privileged information, because most people, websites now have rules against scrapping. So normally, if you want to get this data, you have to pay for it. So he has the best database, the biggest database in the world, and he seems to be getting it for free. So and he seems to be the architect behind it. And has there been any hearing from Congress calling Elon Musk up and the administration and saying, explain to me how you're using AI technology, to do the things you're doing? Has anyone expressed any curiosity about maybe the greatest, what Musk might be doing now is worse than everything Snowden revealed. Okay.
Yeah.
Because
But
he's going to get
there's an additional element that's surely true, Jeffrey, and because they're all frightened of Musk, they think they'll primary them and throw money in the campaign. But the other thing, this transcends Musk. This is just the nature of AI in our current empire mentality. We're going to hijack AI to have an AI initiated war based on some projection that somebody's going to do something bad. And it's going to be probably China, because China is the one that we think is the boogeyman that replaced first the Soviet Union, then international terrorism. And the defense is going to be, well, AI told me to do it. It's going to try to exculpate everybody from moral responsibility from the decisions. And that is frightening because it takes somebody who's got to really have a heart of stone like Richard III, to actually do something and be responsible directly for killing hundreds of thousands of people. AI makes that all antiseptic, like the Enola Gay did on the dropping of Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, right? And you want the threshold to go to war high, because war means legalizing first-degree murder for innocent people, where AI is reducing that every day to almost nothing. Press a button, that's it. That's why we had people who were able to send these predator drones pushing buttons in Utah or Nevada. It kills somebody, a little girl in Afghanistan, walk home.
Yeah.
Good shrugs your shoulders.
Yeah, I assume a lot of these people, the few people, who so far have been picked up, through, for the, who have been detained in preparation for deportation. My guess would be they were spotted through AI. I bet that they're giving Musk all this data, and Trump's telling Musk, find me these attributes. I'm going to give you all the data, and you'll help me find whatever it is I want to find against whoever I want to find it.
Jeffrey, I have a point to add to that, actually. Batar US, which is a pretty radical Zionist group that is tied right back to Israel, is operating in the United States and publicly, openly telling us that they're using facial scan data, different information, and tracking down people. They're the ones that literally threw the name Khalil in the faces of Trump, Pam Bondi, and Rubio. And you could see it on Twitter for weeks. They were tagging, going, this guy, this guy, this guy. And that's the one they went after. Again, even though they had people that actually committed violent acts. So you're absolutely right. But I think you're right, even larger than that is probably from more of a government level as well. But so what's most concerning for me around all of that is, back to the data point is, like you said, both of you, that the data that they're taking is like a gold mine. Like, to be clear, why is, you get data that, like right now, he already made this clear, and I want to make a point about XAI as well, and how that's literally a DARPA program. It's not hard to see, is that ultimately they were using your social media data, which I think is crazy in its own right, but they were pretty, kind of public about it. They were using your engagement on Twitter to train these models. The problem is that they can't confirm stuff. You could lie on Twitter and they can't necessarily tell, right? In the background data for the government, the argument being made is that it's like double confirmed, and like you have action, process, and outcome, like all this different, and it's a gold mine of data. And I think this is the final step in a way. And so that's a very big part of why they're using that. And yeah, you're right. There's no concern. They even said publicly that the data or the privacy aspect was like a secondary concern. They will deal with that when we get there, but we're going to go forward anyway. He said that it got leaked, but they basically own that going forward. And so back
the justifications are so pretextual that Elon Musk said, well, the staggering fraud in Social Security payments, it's 99.7% accurate. And the ones that are inaccurate, they're as much as underpayments than overpayments.
And there is fraud, but you're overkill. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a fairy tale, a complete fairy tale to invade privacy, for sure. And one of the great ironies, of course, is that the birth of the American Revolution was protection of privacy from British writs of assistance. They'd go in and rummage through homes looking for contraband, say you're smuggling in goods and whatever. And that was the light, that was the match that lit the American Revolution, the right to be let alone. And now we turned it on its head. It doesn't mean anything anymore. Right. We're basically living in a big brother society. And we don't have, and unfortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court with the public, they emasculated the Fourth Amendment. You don't need warrants for anything anymore. You just search around anything in the public domain, grab, seize, just out of curiosity, which is and it makes people nervous. It makes the people reluctant to challenge and say things that are controversial, because they figure somebody's going to pick it up and I'm going to come back and lose, and they all self-censor themselves.
Exactly.
Which that is truly the death knell of a democratic society. You can't have self-censorship. You got to have people out there debating and thinking for themselves.
And I think this is
and
why
I find it ironic, a couple of things. One is my bet that I'm highly confident I'll be right about is that these crypto working groups are going to be promoting crypto platforms so they can further expand surveillance. So this has nothing to do about decentralization. It's the opposite. This has to be in recognition that there's a whole universe of people out there who find this technology appealing, and the fact that if the government organizes itself well, it can just significantly expand its surveillance, without needing, warrants. So it's a way of expanding, warrantless surveillance, because they're going to probably say it's going to be easy to have these platforms, but you're going to have to share everything on the platform with us. So, so it's just a way of expanding, the surveillance society. And also interesting that the Trump organization has announced, Trump had previously talked about, his vehement opposition to CBDC, central bank digital currencies, but he's issuing his own Trump-backed, organization, digital currency. I could say he's issuing it. The Trump organization is, but my understanding, unless Bruce, it's otherwise, he surrendered governance of Trump organization, but he did not surrender his economic interest.
Correct.
So he's still the main beneficiary of everything that happens in the Trump organization. Correct? Is that correct?
Oh, go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah. So
And
also, essentially, he's just appointed an agent that he's given power of attorney to, but that power of attorney is to represent basically his interests. So everything that basically it could be an accurate statement to say that everything the Trump organization does is to further the interest of Donald Trump, because
definitely
he's the biggest beneficiary of everything they do. So everything they do is an agent on his behalf, and they're now creating, their own stable coin, which will also be, and they're all stable coins in the U.S. are basically surveillance money. Actually, it's better. They're more effective surveilling stable coins, than the circulation of dollars.
And so really important to bring this back to the XAI overlap, because you're right. And I think what's important, and one thing I hope the audience really listens to what Jeffrey's just saying right there, is that the whole CBDC thing is very real. Central bank digital currencies are actually happening plenty of places in the world and are a huge problem, but the private version of it, which is clearly where Trump is going, is way worse. It's Catherine Austin Fitts has talked a lot about this. It's incredibly more dangerous and less, it's all the same problem with far less accountability, if there's even any there in general. But whether it becomes which one it becomes, or it's a tether aspect there, it's a lot up in the air, but I do agree that's a huge problem. What's interesting, going back to the XAI overlap. So XAI is the name of Elon Musk's artificial intelligence. DARPA had a program called XAI. It was called Explainable AI, that they were studying for a long time. It ended right before, I think a couple of months before Elon Musk bought Twitter. They said we wrapped up, and it was, like we're done with the program. And then he buys Twitter, turns it into X, starts X.xai, and they pretend like it's not. I mean, it is the exact thing. It even says explain AI on Twitter when you hit the thing. It's easy to look up. My point is that just like with total information awareness that later became Palantir, or even your point, Jeffrey, the privatization of the stablecoin as opposed to the CBDC, that's the direction this is all going in. And so it's important to see that XAI, as a former DARPA program, is already starting to overlap exactly what you're highlighting, Jeffrey. This kind of Elon Musk has said he wants this to become like the WeChat in China, a one-stop shop where you can do video calls, phone calls, you can pay your bills. They're all working on that. And so you overlap this with the very clear cryptocurrency direction. I mean, and this is your one-stop shop, kind of like choke point for all that comes through this. And I think it's really important because DARPA has a long history of being tapped into all these different problems we're talking about. And the main two things I see connected through these, specifically Twitter, is DARPA, US government, and Israeli intelligence with Authentics, with CHEQ, and they're all coming together in this larger agenda. And I think that's an important picture because pretty much everything we're talking about today seems to be intertwined with those two main things. And,
and I think I think it's important to understand how contrary they are to the philosophical underpinnings of the United States and who we are. It was Justice Louis Brandeis wrote in a very, very famous opinion that the right to be let alone is the most cherished right amongst civilized people. The right to be let alone. I mean, that's a joke today.
Right.
And 100 years ago, it was viewed as the apex of rights. But the reason is because Americans are docile. They accept this instead of pushing back and claiming, no, you don't have a right to look and understand X, Y, and Z of my background. I have a right to privacy. But it goes back as what Jeffrey was saying and the framers. An uneducated public cannot keep liberty. They're too fixated on personalities. They don't understand the institutional underpinnings, of the right to march to your own drummer. And that's why the government wants to frighten people into self-censorship, and they target those who are willing to think for themselves.
And that's why that's why I believe they're attacking, who's being attacked now. Okay. This is another thing I wrote a Substack, and by the way, Brian, I also checked out the Grok, and I asked this question. So I wrote a Substack about Trump's appointment, and saying is that that basically he's through executive order, they're going to basically sanction any law firm that brings a baseless case against the federal government. Okay, so I ask Grok, should we trust Trump's neutrality with respect to his definition of baseless claims? And Grok came back basically saying, well, Trump has claimed every claim against him is baseless. So if you look at the record of Trump, his history of lawsuits, his history of litigation, his history of how he responds to it, is that basically any attack on him, by definition with respect to him, is baseless. So that means if you just use logic, okay, if Trump has asserted throughout his life that every case made against him or the government while he was in charge of it is baseless, that means that every case brought against the government will be deemed baseless, and every law firm that brings a case against the government will be sanctioned. Okay, that doesn't mean at the end of the day the courts will go along with it, but clearly, this is an act of this is an act of intimidation, because he's basically giving them a green light to go after everything, because they've all said everything is a witch hunt.
Yeah, this goes back, Jeffrey, to what Ryan said, because I'm out and I practice law. There's something called Rule 11 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. If you believe your opponent has filed a frivolous legal or factual argument, you have a right to seek sanctions, except there's due process. You got to prove it. A judge has to approve the sanctions, and that's the deterrent effect. You don't just say the party to the litigation can't decide whether it's frivolous. No case would ever succeed ever, right? The defendant would say it's frivolous, out, and the court says fine. Again, this is a complete preposterous distortion of what due process is about. And what's ironic is that under Rule 11, the traditional sanctions rules, at least 17 of Trump attorneys have been sanctioned for making frivolous arguments on his behalf, including Rudy Giuliani, who's been disbarred. Right. If there's any track record of abusing the legal system by making frivolous arguments, it's Trump's attorneys, not others.
Absolutely. Well, here, since we have a little bit of time, can we roll that into the aspect, going back to the original point about the deportations, and to either of you, I find that can we talk about the legal breakdown behind the whole challenge of the courts? Because from my perspective, it's actually, and I'll start by saying, I think we can all acknowledge that pretty much everybody in a political position, probably judges, and most importantly, have political leanings. And that's why they're chosen by their sides for those very reasons. But that's not to say that whether they're politically motivated or not, that the actual check and balance process of a judge ruling against something that's happening is the way the system is supposed to work, whether or not they're ruling some frivolous way. And so can either of you address, like, is that how it's supposed to work? Can we explain that for people, and why, and is there any merit to what Trump is saying or what their administration is saying about how they're trying to overtake the office of the executive branch? I'd love to talk about that.
Well, I can speak because I was involved in selecting judges in the Reagan administration. And I can guarantee you, we never, ever asked anybody, how will you vote on X case? We asked, what are your theories of interpretation? What do you rely upon in looking at the 14th Amendment? The words, the history, how willing are you to overrule a precedent? That's what it was. It was taboo. We never asked anyone, for example, what's your view on Roe v. Wade, which was an abortion issue at that time. Now, obviously, human beings have predilections, but the whole reason why we have judicial independence is because they have life tenure, can't reduce their salary, even if they were somewhat partisan when they were in private practice on the court. They understand, no, you're supposed to be neutral. Now, with regard to also that neutrality, it doesn't mean that you never make an error. At least since 1805, when then Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase was acquitted of an impeachable offense because he was saying allegedly incendiary things about the Alien Sedition Act, it has been accepted. If you believe a judge has made an error, you get review in the higher courts, right? You do not impeach the judge. That's been understood for 230 years. Impeachment is not the remedy for judicial error. Appeal is, including the appeal of the district court's decision in the Alien Enemies Act. And also what is very, very troubling to me is that in this particular case under the Alien Enemies Act, when the judge is asked for information, what is the evidence that these are involved in any kind of act of invasion? When did you deport them, before or after my preliminary order? The administration has said state secrets. We're not going to tell you anything.
Right.
Remember, this is a judge who has sat at the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court. So he deals with classified information all the time. They're saying we will not even share that information ex parte or in camera, which means only the judge sees it, nobody else. So how's the judge to make a decision if he can't even see the information? A very close example of something was when I was there and we had President Nixon, and he did not want to surrender tapes, White House tapes that could incriminate him, to the grand jury. And the court said, no, it can go in camera to the district judge first. He will decide what needs to be protected and what's relevant to pursuing a criminal investigation. Nixon initially said, no, I'm not going to do it. He wanted Senator Sparkman, who was at that time deaf and dumb, to listen to the tapes and make some kind of written interpretation of what they were to substitute for the hearing of the actual tapes. Didn't work. 30,000 American telegrams came in from citizens that next day. For a week, Nixon backed down and said, okay, I'll hand over the tapes. You cannot have a legal system work in which one side that's involved gets to decide what evidence is available. I mean, it's pretty obviously that means you let a man be a judge in his own case. No, we haven't permitted that doctrine to flourish for at least 4 centuries. A man and a branch, an institution can't be a judge in its own case. As simple as that. And that's what makes what's going to happen very, very dicey. We don't know whether Trump's ever going to hand over this information to the judge so he can actually make a decision based upon accurate understanding of what the facts are. Now, he may hold the administration in contempt, and that's where we're going to see whether Trump really is going to obey court orders or change his mind again and say, well, this is an exception.
Look, Ryan, I'm also going to respond to the question you asked. I think anyone who has raised these issues that all these judges are trying to impede the president from exercising his constitutional obligations. I think anyone who takes seriously any of these arguments is really a moron. Okay. And why do I say they're a moron? Look at the arguments they've even presented to justify their own case. Okay. Interfering with foreign policy. Tell me what about giving these people who they rounded up and sent to El Salvador, these Venezuelans, tell me about how depriving them of due process interfered with foreign policy. Can somebody explain that to me? No. Okay. You can throw the words out and an idiot will believe it because Trump said it. Okay. But that's the only reason they're believing it is because Trump said it, but it's moronic. Okay. Now let's take a look at the other thing. Okay. Another thing I checked out. I understand this trend that our Rago group, the TDA group, there's supposed to be about 600 in the country, spread over about 15 states, more or less. So we're saying a gang that has about, it's in 50 states, there's 600 of them, so they might be about 40 per state. We're saying this gang that's about 40 per state, okay, is an existential threat to the country. And where is the evidence, okay? Again, where is the evidence that they have any ties to Maduro? Were they sent here by Maduro? Did he buy their ticket? You know, is he funding them? Is he determining their targets of who they're going to make their victims of? Is there any evidence that they're, with all the great surveillance powers we have, that there's any active coordination, you know, of any of these activities? Nobody's seen anything, okay? All they're saying is, Trump said it. What do you want to do? You want people to be free? No, we want people to have due process. Whatever claims the government's made against them, prove it. You know, it's simple. It's simple.
But Jeffrey, you've overlooked the CIA. Jeffrey, the CIA.
Go to jail, okay?
Jeffrey, the CIA produced a report, said, no, we don't find any connection. The CIA, this is the CIA report.
Now we don't see any investigating the leak because they don't want people to know that the CIA said, because they're saying these people, okay, are involved with Venezuela when their intelligence says that's not true. So they want to purposely lie to the American public, and now it's a state secret. Okay, so El Salvador Bukele, okay, went to the airport, said oops, making fun, okay, took pictures. In the pictures, you see the planes, you see their tail numbers, you see all the identification of that posted on X. Yet supposedly it's a state secret. If you really analyze the arguments they make,
right,
and this is the best arguments they can come up with, okay, you gotta sit back and say this is just non-serious, and that anyone that believes this really is very dumb. I'm sorry to say that. All the people they say it, they're just very dumb. They parrot the arguments, okay, but the arguments, there's nothing there behind their arguments. Okay, many of them believe that because yes, they hate immigrants and they want them out of the country, and they don't care how, and they don't care about the Constitution. And if the Constitution provides due process for these people, they don't care. Okay.
I would also always add, though, that I agree there's a huge faction of that, but I always want to argue that there's a grouping of people out there that truly they're wrong and are misinformed, uninformed, but that are convinced that there's something else happening. That's always important to include, though, that aren't necessarily bad people, that are just being completely snowed by very dishonest, very manipulative people. But yes, but again, I would still assert what you said, that it's their responsibility to look into these things. So it's still their fault. But I just think it's important to highlight how much of this is a very dishonest organization. I just think the U.S. government, by the way, who is very much just propagandizing anybody who will listen. But so what's important to remember is I think this is very clearly why the Donald Trump administration, or just the U.S. government, and I don't see a difference between the different administrations, clearly has just said, well, they're terrorists now. That's why we can do this. And the reason, as you can speak to this, Bruce, if you agree, that they point back to these precedents and say, well, we've removed terrorists in the past. Well, yes, if you look back at these past examples, there was like terrorist acts that were committed, and there was evidence presented, not just sweep away people they claim are terrorists because you deemed an entire group terrorists, even though half of them aren't even part of this group. You know, it's obvious that this was done so they could try to make this sweeping motion in hopes that they could just let it, like, you know, nobody could check anything. And now that they're being put to the test, they're going, well, state secret, which I think basically proves that they don't want you to see that. If you look into the information, you'll see that one, they knew that they weren't there. They didn't get due process. They didn't prove anything. And to the smaller point, which is still relevant, that they could have not sent them or turned the planes back. They just decided not to.
The fact is that it's the quota system. They want the numbers to play to their MAGA. See, we're doing it. It doesn't matter who they get. They could make up dummies as far as they're concerned. All it is theater, like a movie. And that's why they could care less who they pick up. Whether they're terrorists or not, they just call them all the same thing. But they don't have any evidence. None whatsoever. Yeah.
It's Commodus in the Coliseum.
Yeah, that's right. So the Lions and the Christians. Anyway, that's where we are.
And look at these other cases. We know what people, you know, I want to see government slim down, but I don't want to sit back and say, you know, I'm taking a whole bunch of people on probation because they must have been appointed by Biden. I'm going to fire them all, and I'm going to claim they're all incompetent when they've actually never done a performance review of any of them. So clearly, if you're sending out firing somebody for cause, and you've never proved the cause, there's a difference between saying I've made this government more efficient, so I'm streamlining the functions, and I'm cutting I'm not cutting the person, I'm eliminating the function. And as a consequence of eliminating the function, I'm eliminating the person. Okay. That's one way of streamlining. That's called efficiency. Okay.
Mhm.
But what they're doing is they're going in, they're wholesale firing people without a poor performance review and saying it was for cause when they never did performance reviews. So why don't employees have due process if there's an accusation that they're being fired for cause when there's no evidence to justify that, when there might be evidence to the contrary? Okay. Why don't people think they have a legal challenge? Okay.
Yeah.
How stupid do you have to be to think that people are not entitled to a legal challenge?
And Jeffrey, you
If
pointed this out in the last show.
If the Biden administration has made a binding obligation to make certain payments contractually, okay, what gives the president, the administration, Musk, the right to unilaterally breach a contract and the breaching party not be allowed recourse to an action that represents a breach of an agreement? Well,
Yeah, there's a way to do this,
we know
Jeffrey.
from
It's-
Musk's acquisition.
there's a reduction in there.
There's
There's
a
a
lot of
process.
contracts.
There's a process called reduction in force, RIFs. That happened in Reagan too. But it's not just, hey, you get an email saying, by the way, you're gone. And many of these people on probation had very, very excellent ratings by their superiors. And I think the three of us, I don't want to speak in Ryan, I would cut more than Elon Musk.
Mhm.
I think,
Much
but I would do it. You got to give due process to the
Right.
ones who have built their lives on reasonable expectations. You can transition them, downsize government. And one of the reasons why it's so critical to downsize in the right way is because you want to attract good people to fill the offices that you need in order to perform the basic functions. You are not going to attract anybody to the administration when you treat them inhumanly, like they're like old furniture, just throw it at any time. Who would ever join such an enterprise? Nobody.
You don't fire people for cause
Yeah.
if you don't have a cause, if you just made it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that stigmatizes them. They think, why do I want to buy into this? I can't even go get another job.
Well,
And again, it's not about whether we want big government. I say I want it really slimmed down, especially the military-industrial complex, but many other things too. I don't ever. I didn't think that we needed a Department of Education as to accomplish anything. It doesn't mean you unilaterally get rid of everybody who's built their career on it. It means you can eliminate it in the right way. Congress can hold hearings. You can have a transition program. It can phase out. It has happened. We phased out the Interstate Commerce Commission, Civil Aeronautics Board. They had outlived their usefulness. I don't know whether the Department of Education had that, but process is so critical
right.
to making the government operate fairly and to attract good people and have the system work. Otherwise, you're going to get this gyration. Somebody comes in after Trump and undoes everything he does.
Exactly. And really quickly, Jeff, I want to point out that what you said before, Jeffrey, was that ultimately they've already fired all these people, and then many of which they've been forced to rehire. It just shows you the lack of process and just how belligerent it all is. And I would add to what you guys were saying, I'm quite frankly probably more radical than all of that. I'm pretty much, I don't think the government should exist, but that's way beyond what people probably can wrap their minds around today. But nonetheless, we're all on the same page where if any of this is going to happen, it is about the process. It's about doing so in a way that gives people the rights they're afforded, that makes sure that people aren't just kicked to the side with no real investigation. But I'm agreeing with you. We should go to the point to where, like, how about the IRS next? How about the Fed? Like, these things I think are important in my opinion, but it needs to be done in a way that's not going to leave people stranded, but secondarily, I think more importantly, to where the next element can just do it all back. Like, that's why Catherine keeps making this point from the very beginning, that the way they've been doing this almost guarantees that if it doesn't just go back the way it was, it'll be worse, because executive order. I mean, do you guys miss that Trump on the 14th of March signed an executive order that rescinded 78 Biden executive orders? So there's nothing means anything if they can just sweep away and do it. And the same thing will happen with Trump's.
Yeah, I think Ryan, you and I, with respect to wanting no government, are aligned. I don't want there to be any government. I don't think any government is legitimate.
Right.
So it's not that I'm an advocate of government. I think you and I, Bruce would accept a little more government than you and I would, but none of us are big government people.
Right.
So you and I are no government people. So it's not that we like government. It's not like we want government. We're all saying the same thing. There's a process you do things. You do things the right way, or you do things the wrong way. So things got to be done the right way. to have a Republican form of government, a constitutional Republican form of government, is a government of process. Okay, so no, the process is what's guaranteed.
Yeah.
The result is not guaranteed, but the process is guaranteed, and you got to respect the process. But to also discuss, how full of shit Elon Musk and Trump are. Okay, because they are completely full of shit. Okay, Musk has saved maybe $100 billion, more or less. Okay, if you believe his claims, but I wouldn't believe his claims, because how many false claims do you have to make and still believe somebody?
Right.
Okay, so he keeps putting up numbers, pulling them down, putting up numbers, putting them down, putting up numbers, putting them down. So why would you believe any claim that you see on that website? Okay, so put the numbers. Then you get Rand Paul saying, I want to reduce spending by $500 billion, and I want to do it through rescission. He wants to do it the right way, okay? He wants to go back and say, Congress should get together. I got $500 billion we should cut from the budget, okay? And we have Congress voting on it, okay? So he is basically proposing to save more money, okay, the legal way, okay? Where do you see Trump supporting that? Where do you see Musk supporting that, okay? They're not, because they're full of shit. They're full of shit, okay? $500 billion the right way, or $100 billion that's the wrong way, that because it's the wrong way, it might not end up saving $100 billion, because you might add costs on, and then you might end up making a bigger mess, and there's the cost of the collateral damage or the mess you're making by doing it the wrong way. So,
Jeffrey, it's all about power. It has nothing to do, Jeffrey, this is not about money saving. It's power. They don't want to go to Congress. They want to be able to do anything on their say-so alone. It doesn't matter. They want to set the precedent that says we can do whatever we want, whenever we want, to whomever we want, quoting Caligula at his worst. That's how their model is Caligula, not James Madison, not George Washington, not the Constitution. And that's why they would rather cut $100 billion unilaterally than $1 trillion in the right way, because they'd have to give up their claim to limitless power. These people are sociopaths.
Yep. And here's a point back to the process, right? So based on whether you want to agree out there that Rand Paul has the best of intentions or not is sort of irrelevant. The point is that, in this main point, it's relevant in the larger sense. But the idea that is, if you go through the process he's talking about, that Jeffrey's talking about, clearly there is accountability there. We can see their choices made, whether they even follow through or not. At least we can then go, well, they didn't follow through. The point is that they want no accountability. They want it, like you're saying, Bruce, they want just action. We can't even verify what they're doing. State secret, and the problem is that they're claiming they're the most transparent administration in history, while they're in every possible way going the other direction. So as we've been pointing out the whole time, it's just narrative, and a mass of people that just repeat that. In reality, it's the exact opposite, and that's kind of terrifying. But this is why we're trying to force it into that process.
These wizards out there, it's shown repeatedly that they've claimed cancellation of contracts that occurred under George W. Bush.
Right.
Ridiculous. Doesn't your AI know how to do simple math? Is that how backward it is?
I think they're lying.
Out of first grade out of a mathematics test? It's utterly ridiculous. And the other thing that I think is important here with Donald Trump, when he claims, he stands up and he claims that, these tariffs, 25%, 50% tariffs, you're not going to have to pay for it. The fairy godmother will pay for it, somebody else. And his press secretary says, when she got a question from somebody says, well, I bought imports, I paid for it, not China. She says, oh, well, you can't say that in this press room. You can't disclose the truth.
Did you see your follow-up argument?
This idea that he's going to impose these tariffs, but no, it'll drive prices down. I don't even know how do you characterize
she went on
that.
Fox News and made this argument following up from that exact discussion, and she made it sound like she just dunked on this guy. And her argument was, well, he just doesn't know the long-term plan that Trump claims that by 4 years of this, we'll have enough money generated, we can give it back to you. It's like, oh, so trickle-down economics kind of a game that never really works. It's like, it's just ridiculous. But that's the best they can do. Just trust the plan; it'll come back to you. It never does.
Here's the flaw of that logic, and Bruce and I have talked about this in a previous one. The president has been the power of tariff levying taxes. The Constitution has conveyed to Congress, not the president.
Right.
Now, as part of trade negotiations, in order to extract concessions from another party, they've empowered the president to use tariffs as a negotiating leverage, okay? As a temporary negotiating leverage, okay? But given the fact that Trump's made statements saying, I want to replace the income tax with tariffs, and this is going to produce a lot of revenues, it's going to balance the budget. Basically, he's saying the point of the tariff policy is, excuse me, is to raise money for the government. That requires the appropriation of Congress. So his tariff policy, based upon his own statement of the objective of the tariff policy, is an impeachable act, because he's asserting that the president has the right to levy taxes, which the president doesn't have. Only Congress is doing nothing about the presidential power grab oversetting. And now I don't know who would have standing in bringing a lawsuit against it, because it seems to me it'd be a compelling lawsuit that the president has taken powers, so the question is, and Congress has never officially delegated that power to him. And I don't think Congress has the right to delegate that power to him permanently. So it's just basically saying, well, the Constitution said we're responsible for levying taxes, but we don't want to do it.
Well, this is the legal framework, Jeffrey, unprecedented. In 1978, Congress enacted what's called the International Emergencies Economic Powers Act. It's supposed to happen basically in times of war, but it's open-ended on what the heck is a national emergency. So Trump, he calls everything a national emergency, right? Energy national emergency, even though we've never had more energy in our life. So he's used the declaration of a national emergency to go ahead and impose tariffs. Now, there is another section of the Trade Act, 1962, that has a process that you need to go through. You have due process, you have hearings. The Secretary of Commerce makes a recommendation to the president after 90 days, and then he can only impose tariffs on a product-by-product basis, not across the board on a country-by-country basis. But he's invoked, for the first time ever, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, say, I can impose tariffs country by country at whatever amount I want, right? And who would have standing? Anybody whose price goes up could go in and say, wait a minute, I'm paying more for XYZ because of this declaration. I think you can get standing. My understanding is there are a group of business people who are going to be suing on that score. But really what is appalling is Congress basically has had the power to raise revenue stolen by the executive and says nothing.
Right. It's captured.
But Bruce, I know he's declared a national emergency, but in all his speeches, none of the speeches has really referenced an emergency. What he's doing is he's basically saying, I want to restructure how we take revenues in, and I want to restructure industrial policy. Okay, so I didn't know that the president has absolute control over the economy and that Congress has nothing to say. So, and that all this can be done through presidential fiat. Okay, and that anybody that attempts to challenge anything he does is interfering with foreign policy or interfering with the president's God-given, powers to do whatever he wants to do. So this none of this is constitutional. There's almost nothing. Every time Trump opens up his mouth, okay, he's breaching some other part of the Constitution.
Right.
So and you're right, as both said, this is about power. He's going to take grabbing power until somebody stops him. Okay, and so far, the only people getting in the way, are some universities that teach people to think, and so we can't have people thinking. So we got to attack the universities and start structuring their curriculum, so they can learn how to think. Like we can have, what was that? What was that movie with Malcolm McDowell and he had all those violent images thrown at him, Clockwork Orange. So I mean, I guess that's what he wants to do to the American society is a national Clockwork Orange, of basically, having us just take a look at MAGA, until, and just force our eyes open, and bring it in. So, so he basically, it's clearly he's a despotic president, and is targeting anyone that interferes with that can be an impediment to his acts of despotism. And I don't even know to me, the evidence is so evident. The evidence is so apparent. I don't even know how it could be even subject to an intelligent conversation.
Yeah, but Jeffrey and Ryan, this is what is even more frightening. Is despite what Trump has done, which I don't part company with anything you've said, his successor is never going to give back anything that he inherits.
Exactly.
No president has ever yielded back power he inherited from a predecessor. It doesn't happen because people gravitate to politics for power. That's it. Not principle, power. And that you let this go, we're done. The next one's not going to give us back any power. I remember again the conversation I had with John Conyers, chair of the Judiciary Committee, 2008 lame duck session after Obama had been elected president. And I said, John, you got to have congressional resolutions repudiating all these extravagant claims of Cheney and Bush. You just got to go on record to make it clear you've set a marker. You cannot do this. You're not going to accept that with any president. He said, Bruce, Obama's going to give us back all our power. He didn't get back any power, right? He even took it to a new level. And then his successor took the new level. And then Biden takes it to a new level. And now we're going to a new level again. The only way we can ever get back to constitutional normalcy until we impeach and remove a president from all these usurpations. Then a successor will understand, I can't do this. But unless the impeachment power is invoked, no president is ever going to give back a shred of power from the predecessor.
And we'll see, this is the problem, since it's pretty clear that Congress, as we've been pointing out the entire time, has completely delegated, I think, whether by force or whatever, by threat, by blackmail, their power over all this stuff. So even through that process, the problem is that the power structure seems to be willing to consolidate power for all of their interest over the people of this country. And I think that's happening around the world. I think this kind of rampant lawlessness is being kind of picked up on by a lot of other power structures in the world, and it's kind of scary. But I think the bigger point in all of this, I think we all agree on how clearly this is an unconstitutional power grab, and it's been going on through left and right administrations. The larger point of what we're highlighting here is back to the tariffs, that it's kind of around, that it's also not working. Like, even if what you argue he's saying, you can already see Canada responding with tariffs back. And so even if you want to act like he somehow has this grand plan, you can, and somehow that will benefit us, it's not going that way either way, because other countries are responding, or he's throwing tariffs at Venezuela because they dare to speak up about what's happening in the world. Like, it's just, it seems irrational. And I think we all know, and I think they know, that it won't actually ever trickle back to us. It's about just getting us to go along with more of their unilateral actions. So like you're saying, Bruce, it'll continue to be a stepping stone. Well, I mean, getting more powers, Patriot Act, never comes back.
We would be remiss not in reminding everybody on this program, anybody who watches, we, the people of the United States, are the last guardrail. If we don't push back and scream at Congress and say, we're not going to elect you again unless you discharge your responsibilities. I say it's like the 30,000 telegrams coming in daily during Watergate, and then Congress got off their posteriors. It didn't happen on its own. They were responding to the election. They could see the citizens. They know this is not the United States we want. Unless the citizens voice their protests, it's not happening. And that means the ultimate responsibility is us. And that's why Jeffrey was pointing out, and you as well. You need to get educated. That is an obligation you have as a citizen in a self-governing society. You must. Even though there's not any immediate sanction we can impose, it's kind of a moral obligation you have. If you want to live in a tyranny, there are plenty of places you can move to, right? Got a lot of options. Self-governance requires a greater amount of responsibility. And that is the order of the day right now. And again, it's whether it's Trump. I mean, I've been trying to get President impeached so far back, 5, 6 presidents, Democrat, Republican, because they've all been usurping the power. Right. It's not a Trump issue alone, but you got to start somewhere. If you don't start somewhere, it's never going to change. Once you use it once and kick a president out, you're not going to have to use it for several centuries. But it's up to us as the people of the United States. We need to make our voice known, not through violence, not through ad hominem attacks, a simple statement to member. We need you to support your oath of office, discharge your obligation under the Constitution. If it's an impeachable offense, we need to go forward. This has to be done in a proper way. And I, of course, would say, if Congress is responsible, pass a resolution warning the president. If you don't shape up, these are the places we think you're clearly committing impeachable offenses. Right. You either cure it within 60 days or going to impeach you. We're not doing this just to flex our muscles and show we can be Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator. This is for the future of the country. We can do due process. But if we don't insist on that, can guarantee you, I'm in Congress all the time. It isn't going to happen by spontaneous combustion. No way.
But when we talk about like elections, that one person was mentioned about the next president, which implies the next election. And Ryan, I'm going to go a little off topic just for 1 second, just to share some information. Just came across my screen that this Wall Street Journal has reported. I haven't seen the article; it's just a headline that came up that Israel helped provide intelligence for the attack on the Houthis. So
Surprise.
seems like it was probably a joint operation. But so I just share that with you. But in Trump's most executive order, which is beginning the presidential takeover of federal elections, one of the things Trump talked about was putting Musk in charge of election integrity. So Brian and you, Bruce, if Musk is put in charge of election integrity, how many of them thinks that our votes will remain anonymous?
Well, I'd like to start by saying I don't necessarily think our votes translate to the outcome today, but that's a different conversation. I'm very critical of how that, not to say that it's not paramount in a representative government, but that I think it's been hijacked from us a long time ago, which in my mind overlaps with what we were just saying in regard to even the congressional conversation and lobbying and how that plays a different factor, even if we do what Bruce is saying. But nonetheless, I agree with you. That's the direction we should be going in. But there's a different dynamic today. But back to the votes, I think that the problem with that is we are already in a situation where this whole system has been broken to a degree, maybe it's not even functioning for a very clear reason. But if Elon comes into that position, or I think just the abuse of power continues in the regard to the elections more so than we've already seen, I just think that's going to be like the final death throes of this conversation. And also the use of the same conversation we just had, using that data in real time to continue to train these models. I think that's a part of everything we're dealing with. But
yeah, and I think there's also another constitutional problem, Jeffrey. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution says that when you're setting voting qualifications and how you count ballots, it applies state by state according to the state election laws, and except in federal elections, Congress can decide how the votes are counted.
We've already seen Congress delegate every authority they can to the president. Congress doesn't want to vote on anything. They tried to put a budget together. They can't put a budget together. They don't want to be accountable for anything. So
but you need to get
the paycheck. They want to appear on TV. Okay, they want to be celebrities, but none of them really actually want to do their work. So
correct. But there is a case, Jeffrey. It's called Clinton versus New York, when Congress tried to escape responsibility for the tax and spend issues. And they tried to give line item veto to the president. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, you can't do that. You can't delegate that. You have to vote on it. You can't give the president the lawmaking authority. And that's the president saying there's certain things that Congress cannot delegate. If you read Article 1, the simple text says, all legislative power shall be entrusted to a Congress of the United States. It doesn't say you can give it away.
What if Trump does what FDR threatened? What if Trump stacks the Supreme Court with Matt Gaetz clones? Okay.
He couldn't do that right now because he'd have to get a statute to enlarge the number of justices from 9 to 15, which was Roosevelt. And that means he's going to have to overcome a filibuster in the Senate. And there's no way he could accomplish that. There's just no way. And moreover, even remembered, Jeffrey, when Roosevelt tried that plan, he had crushed Alf Land in 46 states to 2. He got virtually every single vote, and still the American people turned on Roosevelt because they knew what was at stake. Now, maybe the American people won't do it today, but that was in light of the biggest landslide in the history of the presidency at the time he did this. So, I mean, I have some hope that Trump, with much less mandate, could not fool the American people to think they're giving up their liberties forever.
There's another point, though, and I think you're 100% right. The difference, though, is that we're seeing a different direction today in regard to this back and forth with the courts. And accusing them of taking the power of the executive branch. And so if they continue to go in this direction, and we've already seen examples of this, we saw the U.S. working with Prospero in Honduras in regard to getting rid of the judges there. We saw Bukele do the same thing in El Salvador, right? This action as if, and weirdly enough, by the way, Netanyahu just publicly said yesterday that, we're not losing our independent judiciary. We're not losing our democracy. We're fighting the deep state. It's like, well, where have we heard that before? You see the same kind of narrative coming up. So I expect to exactly the conversation we're having, that Trump's administration is going to try to consolidate power even more to argue that the justice system is the problem. And you're going to have these people, even you can agree and argue that there's clear political motivation and even other aspects of problems there. It's the system that needs to remain, and we need to work to maintain that as opposed to remove part of the check and balance. But that's what they're going to do, I think. I think they're going to go after these people, if not like Jeffrey's talking about, find ways to try to remove them, whether legally or not, so they can put people there that would agree with them, or just find a way to supersede it in general. That's where I think it's going to go. That's what scares me.
No, I understand. At this stage, I think we're in a post-constitutional world.
Yeah.
The restraints are political. They're not legal anymore. And they'll get away. They'll do anything they want that they think that they can get away with. So in that sense, that's why I say, unless we have an awakened public that's going to protest and scream, you're going to lose. And that's why I think these by-elections are going to be very, very critical to what the Trump administration does. I think they got a couple in Florida. They are supposed to be Republican seats, but if he loses votes, then he may change direction. But if he doesn't lose any votes and he says, well, why should I change a winning formula in 2024? Then I think it is the end of the rule of law. And at that point, we just maneuver the best we can. But the idea we live under a government of laws, not of men, is out the window.
Given the fact that Trump on January 6th, according to a testimony that's been provided, was completely indifferent to the threats against Mike Pence's life.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't think Trump would order the assassination of anyone, but I think he does try and provoke the type of antipathy towards his people he perceives as his enemies, which is anyone that gets in his way. He in a moral sense incites violence. So the question is, at what point does he get so frustrated if he gets impeded that he further amps up his voice, which is amplified by Musk and others, and we start seeing people assassinated? Again, not that he ordered it. He didn't order people to invade the Capitol, but he seemed to be enjoying it, because he did nothing about it. This is a guy that when there's violence, this is the guy that when he sees protests, he wants to send cops in and shoot the protesters. So, here he was, on TV, eating popcorn or whatever he was doing, for 4 hours, doing nothing. And with everybody coming in and pleading with him to do something that he ignored. So the question is he probably enjoyed what he was watching, because if he didn't, he would have stopped it. And so, I don't know if we'll get an environment, in this country where, he's getting angry, things are not going well, and he's going to start blaming people, and one of the people that follow him might feel very motivated to commit an act of violence because of his description of these people.
But Jeffrey, it's worse. He didn't just sit there with a popcorn. He issued tweets attacking Mike Pence at the time that they're attacking the Capitol. He said, if he's not doing the right thing, what do you expect? So he wasn't just a passive spectator. He was I liken him to Henry II and Becket, who will rid me of this turbulent priest. And then Becket disappears. So it's not unexpected that Pence's life was threatened. He could see the guillotine. He could see the noose that was being drawn up, hoping and chanting, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. It can be indifferent. How could you miss that? It was front stage. And that's why I think that in this particular situation, it is true that as Sotomayor, Justice Sotomayor wrote in her dissent in the Trump v. U.S. case, with regard to why she was so appalled at immunity. She gave us a maybe not so hypothetical. Trump orders SEAL Team 6 to assassinate an opponent. Immunity, immune. Is that going to be tempting to Mr. Trump? I think it is.
Yeah, I want to comment on, I think it's important to highlight, with the January 6th overlap, that clearly, I mean, it's quite obvious. Like, everyone loves to put the partisan game on, there's no accountability here because you're taken out of context. The partisan media attacked them, and they play it about both sides. They want to ignore the problems on their side. But I think the same thing happened there, where clearly there was obvious, fanning of flames in plenty of ways that Trump did with January 6th. But I also think it's important to take a really hard stance on principle. And I'll just to be clear, I'm on the side of the free speech argument of fire in a theater, anything. Like, people are responsible for their actions. Even if people, I think that's an important line to take today. And we can talk about that if you'd like. But I think the Trump side of it is important, that even though he did in some cases, fan the flames of the radicals like the left does all the time in the same way, I still think it's important that we make it about the people's actions who are carrying it out. And so bringing that into any other conversation, that ultimately I think all of these politicians on both sides of the paradigm lean into the most radical elements when they need that, and then pretend they're not there in other contexts. I think it happens every day. And January 6th was a really clear example of that. But I think it ties into some much larger intelligence operations. But I think it's important to, it was, I think, done to create, it's a stepping stone to where we are right now. Right. It's actually incredible to think.
That's what, Ryan, I agree with that. That's why I was careful to say I thought morally, not legally. Okay.
Oh, I know. I agree with what you're saying, Jeffrey. I'm just making.
I don't think. If I know I have significant influence over people, if I know it, and if I use that influence in a way that's harmful, okay, ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm not forcing that person to be influenced by me. And if they are, shame on them, not shame on me. Maybe shame on me for being immoral, but not shame on me for doing anything illegal, because I don't instruct people to do things illegal and put a gun to their head, so Trump didn't do that. So I always thought of the charges that Smith, that was brought against him, the weakest charge was that related to that, where I thought the charges that should have been investigated, was the fake electors, because there's a lot of evidence that, because the lawyer who was organizing that acknowledged that he was doing it, pleaded guilty, and said it was coming from the White House, and the White House was organizing this stuff. So the White House has no role in this process. So that deserved to be investigation. And I thought of all the cases, the strongest one, was the documents case. So, unless there's really evidence that he really did, declassify the documents, but given the testimony, some of the testimony that people have heard, again, we've been deprived of seeing, the files associated with that case. But some of the testimony is that he was actively engaged in obstructing justice. He did ask his attorneys to see whether he could destroy some of the content. He was trying to move it around to hide it. So there seems to be evidence to that effect. So that seemed to be, legitimate cases that he took stuff out, probably a lot of it classified. I've spoken to a couple of friends I have who I know as journalists, and I've asked them that now that Trump has all that property back, why don't they use the Freedom of Information Act of going after all those documents, since Trump has said they were declassified, and let the American public see what he declassified. So let's see what he took. If they're declassified, let him put it in the library, let him publish a text, let the public see every single document that he declassified, because then if they're declassified, then it seems to me that under Freedom of Information Act, we should be able to see everything that was declassified.
Yeah, but Jeffrey, the evidence is better than that. You remember, we had him, this is after he left office. He's at Bedminster in New Jersey, and he's showing a document that to a journalist said, well, I didn't declassify this, but I shouldn't be showing this because I didn't. This is after he's out of office. Here, now I'll do it. He acknowledged he hadn't declassified while he was president. The other thing that I would want to point out, Jeffrey, with regard to the basic charge of January 6th, it was attempting to defraud the American people out of the legitimate election by having the votes properly counted. The arguments that he was giving to on the ellipse, making to his his audience there was only part of the larger picture, where the fake electors was part of the overall jigsaw puzzle. So this all fit into the same game, try to prevent the actual counting of the proper electoral votes. And on that score, if this isn't illegal, we know that he called the Justice Department, their acting attorney general and deputy, said, make up the idea that you're investigating alleged corruption in the votes in Georgia. Just put out the press release so we can have an excuse not to certify the votes. If that's not an attempt to defraud the outcome, I don't know what is. And then when they said, no, we're not going to do that, he said, now I'm going to fire you and get a replacement until they all said we're all going to resign. Now, that doesn't show a guilty mind trying to upset the election. I don't know what does.
Well, another thing I'll add to that, Bruce, is when Bannon made the comment saying that Trump was going to, and this was before the election, he said, that Trump is going to, if it's a close race, something like Trump is just going to declare victory, and declare fraud and whatever. So the question is, and Bannon refused to testify, so he went to jail because he refused to cooperate. So Bannon had meetings with Trump. So the question is, did Bannon just make that up because he thought it would be interesting content for his audience, or was that a product of conversations he had with Trump? And we'll never know the answer of that, but it seems kind of coincidental. And again, it might be just a coincidence. So I'm not saying there's not a possibility it'll be a coincidence, but it might be a coincidence, and it might not be a coincidence that when Bannon said that, it's not that was Bannon's impression, from his own point of view, or that was a product of having conversations with Trump. So he was a person of knowledge and sharing the knowledge that he had from a conversation with Trump, because everything Bannon said is exactly what Trump did.
Yeah. And as the lawyer, I just want to underscore for our audience, this attempts to accomplish an illegal end is a crime, even if you don't succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't, as a matter of law, it doesn't exculpate Trump that he didn't succeed in preventing Mr. Pence from counting the votes. I mean, I don't know how you can not recognize that was his goal ever since the balloting in November of 2020. Yeah. Everything went that one motivation, whatever it was, Clark, the fake electors, the repeated statements that this is all fraud, sending Rudy Giuliani. Remember, he filed 61 suits. He lost every one of them, challenging, the outcome of the election. He had a right to make those challenges, but he lost. Whether they were Trump judges or Obama judges or Clinton judges or Bush judges, he lost them over and over again because there was no evidence. Then he continues to persist that I don't know how he can to other conclusion then, you're trying to upset the election results as our process determined Mr. Biden was the winner. And that, unfortunately for Mr. Trump, is a crime.
Right. Well, I think it's important, since we kind of are on January 6th, right? I think it's important to lay a couple things out there. Well, I'm of the mind, again, to remember my opinion that I genuinely don't think our votes translate to the outcome for a while. And I think that's important from my perspective, whether you disagree or not out there, so you know where I'm coming from. But I would like to add on that larger point. I think it's interesting, and this is how this game has kind of devolved into in the partisan mind, that there's arguments made, which aren't necessarily invalid, that he's fighting some kind of opaque power structure, even though he's literally the power structure. The point is that it's like, if you're dealing with something where they're dishonestly dealing with you, that those were his actions to try to beat back that illegal system. And you can see why that works for some people. You know what I mean? Because what else would you do when you're fighting the deep state kind of an argument? My point is, I think a lot of times, a lot of this, whether everyone involved knows that, is in the interest of a long-term manipulation of the American people. And I think we're seeing that right now with the way this is all playing out, whether everyone's aware of that. So I think both sides were proven. And I think you can go back. I mean, in my living memory, every election that I've seen in my lifetime, I think there's evidence of some kind of manipulation, voter fraud, whatever else. And I think that was clear in that election from both sides. And I made this case from before. There's evidence to that on all sides. So it's interesting that it's not about my mind whether one person or the other. I think they were all very clearly doing the things they always do in every election as much as they can get away with. And they were using it back and forth to try to achieve some kind of an end. And so I'm saying in all of that, it's that I think we're in a system that is completely broken. That it's not about trying to fix this. It's about trying to find a way past it and go back to what we're talking about in this whole conversation. And that if we get lost in the weeds around the individual sides, it almost helps the illusion, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I just
but
wanna add-
I think if you go back to what Jeffrey said, it's about process.
yes,
Listen, we have a process. If you think the other side cheated, you can sue in court and
Exactly.
recounts. And Trump utilized it. He had a right to utilize it. Some of the cases he argued were so frivolous that he got Rudy Giuliani disbarred because he's just making up things that you don't get to do. And you can have Rule 11 without an executive order that sanctions that kind of thing. And he had a right to do that. And the process came out. He didn't like it, but then run in the next election. You don't get to throw those court decisions aside from the fact, and then run the partisanship. If you look at virtually all of the evidence, incriminating evidence about January 6th, the witnesses are who? They're Trump people, as Jeffrey pointed out, his own lawyers. William Barr, the attorney general, says this is crap. I can't go along with that. William Barr was the one who thought the Mueller report was a bunch of garbage. He was hired because everybody thought he would be Mr. Trump's hired gun. So you got Republicans saying, yeah, we are the ones that provide the evidence to show, no, there's nothing to this claim. Then if that's true, what can you impute to the motivation behind trying to stop Pence from counting the votes, except you're trying to defraud the American people out of the results as the process determined?
To undermine the entire process. That's what I think it really comes down to, is to create, because let's not forget that January 6th itself, there's an endless amount of evidence around the manufacturing of that event. And I think that's important to highlight. And these are things that I've dived through extensively, whether we're talking about presence of the Azov movement from Ukraine, literally on the ground, screaming things in Russian. It's on tape. Or elements of the like Antifa element groups, people that are on camera going, we did it. We tricked them. We got them.
I want to underscore how far back this corruption, the corruption of the system is. And I use this because, I don't want to beat on Trump. This is not a Trump issue alone. It's the institutional issue.
Exactly.
I remember because I was involved in getting Clinton impeached, not because he lied about sex, but because he's got a case. And under oath, he lies to a federal judge who ultimately sanctioned him and fined him $90,000. You're corrupting the system of how we obtain evidence. You can't do that. Anyway, so he's impeached for perjury, obstruction of justice. He was lying about, I never had sex with that person.
Right.
And so you had Democrats. I remember Robert Byrd said, well, I think it's an impeachable offense, but I'm going to vote to acquit him anyway. Democrats, because they knew that Clinton lied. I mean, everybody who wasn't a moron knew Clinton had lied under oath. And he repeated it a second time for a grand jury. We even saw the document, the interview on TV. I didn't have sex with that woman. I don't know the meaning of the word alone. Depends upon the meaning of the word is, Come on. We got to dispute the meaning of the word is. You're not dealing with an honest person. But anyway, the Democrats, they knew that he had committed perjury and lied. They voted to acquit him anyway, even before the trial began. So the whole system, Democrat, Republican, has all been turned upside down for many, many years. That's what we need to understand. Trump didn't just come out of the sky like Athena from Zeus's brain. Been building both sides. Crown the president, do whatever you want. It's all partisan. Law means one thing when we're in power. It means the opposite when something else in power. The system can't work under that principle. Right. And now we see what's collapsing.
Yeah, I think, Ryan, the point you and I strongly agree upon is that the system is systemically fraudulent. Okay. Right. So it's systemically fraudulent. It's not Trump fraud, Biden fraud. It's systemically fraudulent. So it's not a personal problem. It's a systemic problem. And that's why your answer and my answer are the same, is the issue is that, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Right. And the best thing to do is to not convey any power to anyone, which is getting rid of government and never giving any entity that type of authority over you, because it's going to end up systemically corrupt, no matter how good the intentions are of the people who designed it. So I think that's something you and I agree upon. So,
we should have an entire conversation about that at some point. I'll talk for hours about it.
So, going back to, and yes, there could have been a lot of fraud in the election, but at the end of the day, we established rules and procedures for how we adjudicate these problems. Okay. So we don't go outside the agreed upon framework for how we resolve disputes. Okay. So going in, even if some of it was manufactured, even some people were things, going in, committing violence, yelling, hang Mike Pence, going in, breaking this up, disturbing Congress, while it's in the act of certification of the president, okay, it's just not the right way of doing things. It isn't. So we should never legitimize that form of protest that resorts to violence. So, I strongly disagree with that. And sometimes you're a victim and you just got to move on with life. And I'm going to give you a personal example. Okay. I was involved, significantly involved with Parler, the app that got deplatformed after January 6th. In some ways I could say, financially, I probably was more damaged than Trump as a consequence of January 6th. Okay. I was one of the lead investors in a platform that was, and I was actively engaged in it. I mean, this was a platform that was completely irrelevant before I got involved in it. Okay. It was almost a dead platform. And it went from almost a dead platform to the most downloaded app in the world after 6 months, and the only change had been there was Parler pre-me and Parler post-me. So, and Bruce was involved in Parler.
Yeah, right.
So he lived through, through that experience, with me. And, so, so look at what happened, a couple of days. I can tell you, what happened. I had a conversation with Amazon. Okay. Amazon, I was told by the CEO of Parler, the founder and CEO, that just 3 days before, that Parler, there were communications between Parler and Amazon, where Amazon said everything's perfect in our relationship, and then suddenly, Parler became a threat to national security. So, if you ask any member, if when the FBI investigated the whole issue about January 6th, okay, they found almost nothing, no organization was occurring on Parler. None of it. Okay, there were a few terrible isolated posts on Parler, but those posts that were on Parler were not unique to Parler, and there was no organization of activities. So, and from my knowledge, Parler was sharing some of that information through the chief policy officer, was sharing it with the FBI. So Parler was cooperating with the FBI. And from what I was told, after the fact, that Parler had shared over 50 cases of content that they brought to the attention of FBI through the discretion of the chief policy officers. So, what happened? 2 or 3 days before Parler was taken down, somebody from Amazon called and asked to speak to the founder CEO, mid-level person. Okay. And from what I discovered, from what I've been told about what the nature of the conversation was, the person asked the CEO about activity on the platform, if more people were coming over, might Trump come over, and what was the anticipation of how the platform would grow. So this was after January 6th, the day after or 2 days after. And apparently, the CEO, I guess, decided to maybe puff or whatever. So talked about how a lot more people will come over and the platform would double in size. And I think the results of this conversation were used in lawsuits between Parler and Amazon, as evidence of basically saying, Parler cannot adequately moderate content with the size of an audience it has, and if it doubles in size, it definitely can't. So within like 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours, okay, Apple called Parler a threat to national security. Google just dumped Parler. Amazon went public calling also Parler a threat to national security. But it was so much of a threat that they left Parler up for another day and a half, okay, so that people could strip Parler of all the content. Almost every single supplier of Parler, of supporting third-party infrastructure, immediately abandoned Parler, also calling Parler a threat to national security. If anyone asks, Tim Cook, who I understand said he personally made the decision to drop Parler, what evidence was he has that Parler was a threat to national security? None existed. And the cases that Apple had complained to Parler about, which were maybe 40, 50, something like that, posts, I don't think any reasonable person could come to the conclusion that those posts represented a threat to national security. And again, they had zero information whatsoever that anything was being organized on Parler. Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Jeffrey, they were also posted on Twitter, right?
There were Democrats on Twitter prior to this saying Parler should be shut down. So Parler was destroyed based upon what I consider slander, libel and slander, in my opinion. I don't control the entity, so I never controlled how Parler responded, through a litigation strategy. But I didn't sit and whine and go out and try and organize a mob to go after Jeff Bezos or anyone else. No, you move on in life, okay? Shit happens.
Jeffrey, isn't it correct that they also posted those things on Twitter and everywhere else? They just decided to focus on Parler. That's what happened, right?
In life. There's no guarantee. It's always just.
I think it's important.
If you don't have any evidence, you move on. It doesn't matter how strong your convictions are. Okay. I might have lost as a consequence of that $1 billion. Okay.
Wow.
But I moved on with my life. Okay. Right. So I moved on. If I would have had evidence and I would have been in control, I probably would have litigated. But I have logic. I have a whole bunch of circumstantial things that I can make deductions, and maybe my power of deduction is accurate, but that still doesn't mean, as accurate as my deduction might be, as good as my speculation might be, that doesn't mean I have a valid court case that I can win in court. And I'm satisfied with that because I don't want court cases won on people's skills at speculation and deduction. I want cases adjudicated based upon the evidence and only the evidence. And I could be right about everything, okay? But I still didn't think I had a good lawsuit, okay? With respect to collusion, that all these parties were acting in concert, to basically, my theory had always been that really Parler was not the target. I think they wanted to keep Trump off social media, and there was a front since I think that Trump, and again, it's just speculation, but I think I'm probably right, that the real target was Trump, that they wanted to keep Trump off, and to keep Trump off, they had to destroy Parler. I think that's sick. I'm convinced that's what happened, but ultimately I had to move on with my life because I can't prove anything. I'm not going to whine, I'm not going to go out and raise money. Poor me, please donate to me. I'm such a victim of this terrible deep state. I might have been a victim of the deep state, okay? So could be true. I mean, maybe there's a high probable case. There probably might be a better case that I was a victim, then Trump lost it, then Trump won the election. But at the end, I just moved on with my life, okay? Because I respected the process, okay? And you understand that the process is not always just. It doesn't always come to the right outcome, but if you have an idea of how to make the system better, not how to get the result you want, you propose how to make the system better. Mm-hmm. You don't propose how you win the result. If I can find a flaw in the system, then I suggest how we change the system so we have a better process, but not one that just is there to produce, the outcome I want. And I'll make one other point about Parler that I find really absurd. Okay. TikTok has been officially designated by the U.S. government officially as a threat to national security, correct? Okay?
Yeah.
Yet it's in the App Store, it's downloadable, and it's a must-have app, okay? Okay. So Parler, not a threat to national security, removed from the App Store, something that Congress and the courts have said it's a threat to national security. Okay, the president has kind of acknowledged the threat to national security because he keeps granting extensions, but ultimately he doesn't want to change the outcome. He wants TikTok to be U.S. owned. So he's not said, because if he abandoned the concept that it was not a threat to national security, there'd be no basis for him to try to force a sale, to a U.S. owner if it's not a threat. So here you have all these parties agreeing that this is a threat to national security. And while it's a threat to national security, it's a must-have app, okay? And Parler which was never a threat to national security. And everyone who made the claim had no evidence to back up that claim because nobody ever asked them what evidence they had. They just made the statement. Okay. So I think I have a good claim to victimhood that caused significant financial adverse consequences to me. But what did I do? I moved on with my life. Okay. If I would have had an action, but I'm not going to rile the public to hate any of these parties, to go after them, to commit violence against them. No, you move on with life. You move on with life.
Jeffrey, let me relate something that's not nearly as dramatic as yours, but maybe it adds some further insight about how to deal with lunacy. So I'm invited, this is several years ago, to speak at the Harvard Law School Forum about war powers, right? I have a plane ticket, they have a hotel reservation, I'm going up there to speak. But then the 11th hour, they say, sorry, an anonymous person doesn't like your views on something related to some issue on World War I. So I said, and the person didn't have the courage at least to identify. He was on the board of directors, said, no, we can't have Mr. Fein up here. So they canceled this, and I wrote a letter. I said, gee, I don't have a constitutional right to come up and speak to the Harvard Law School Forum. You have a right to do this. But after all, I would think at Harvard Law School, they would try to teach students to understand the First Amendment more like Voltaire than Thomas de Torquemada. And Voltaire said, as everyone remembers, I may disagree with you, but I would give my life to defend your right to do so. And I wrote a letter also to the Harvard Law School dean, said, gee, it seems like you're educating students with a deficient understanding what free speech is about. Of course, they didn't do anything, but then I invited them. I said, listen, if you disagree with me on this issue, you can come down. I'll rent a room at the National Press Club and let's have a debate. You can actually choose the host so that we can have a civilized debate over this issue that caused you to boycott me at the Harvard Law School Forum. No, they wouldn't take that up either. So you got to try to engage with them. Anyway, that's how I tried to address the issue. And but they didn't move on. And I say the fact that there was such indifference, and this is at Harvard Law School. This is what people believe free speech is about at Harvard Law School. I said, wow, it shows you how far we've descended, into the law of the jungle, and rather using our cerebral faculties and focus on process rather than personalities.
Absolutely. Well, I want to just say in general, I think the important thing you're both highlighting is, that's standing on principle. And I think that's one of the most important messages in general today is to be erring on the side of integrity and principles and focus on the outcome and stop paying attention to all the noise and narrative, Yeah. And unfortunately, I do have to break off here pretty soon, but I want to just add to what you said there, Jeffrey, that you may not want to. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and give you my thoughts about what I think happened there, if that's okay. As I very much think that Parler was the scapegoat. I think that was about making it out to be this is the problem, even though it's obvious, as I think plenty of people highlighted that on Twitter and all the rest, even more so coordinated or the same statements were made across these platforms. And so it's clearly, I think, about making it seem as if something was being done. And I think it was really about I personally don't think it was about going after Trump. I think it was about building into the same kind of thing we're dealing with today, right? And now you have this illusion of consolidation through Twitter, which I think was ultimately the way it was supposed to go. And we're watching as the U.S. power structure apparatus continues to consolidate its power over the American people. Now, I know a lot of people don't see it as that kind of a coordinated effort, but regardless of the how, I think we all see that that's what's happening, right? Like it is literally coming to the point to where the power is being consolidated to the point to our own the people that are supposed to be defending the Constitution are the ones beginning to destroy it. I think moves like you highlighted, Jeffrey, were incremental steps to where we are now, personally.
Well, Ryan, maybe validating that point, I think one person shared with me that right after it was announced Parler's, deplatforming and destruction, that Jack Dorsey posted a tweet on Twitter that was just basically a smiley face. So as a response to the act. So he was celebrating the destruction of Parler. So was he involved in it? Not involved in it? I don't know. I'm not going to make any accusations, but all I'm just saying is that might be evidence to the claim that you make, and I could be wrong, and you could be right. But we've gone. Ryan, I know you have to go, and I want to respect everybody's time. This has been, for me at least, a wonderful conversation. So I hope you have enjoyed it, both of you, and I hope everybody who watches it will have found this to be, a worthwhile way to spend some time. So I want to thank both of you very, very much. And I'd like to give you each, any concluding words that you'd like to give. Bruce, you go first, and then Ryan, and then we will, call this a day. And again, thank you so much, both of you.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to use my time to give plaudits to James Madison, despite you two believing that any government is worse than the disease. I think Madison's separation of powers, if it's honored, shows that you can get government, the scorpions, to be against each other, so you can minimally have defense against predation, keep government in check by separation of powers, and still celebrate liberty, despite the fact that we still know that those who gravitate to government are largely going to be sociopaths. And that worked. It showed that it worked for 100 years until we decided we wanted to be an empire. So I don't think it's quite much fanciful to think that you can, if you honor a system of government that James Madison architected, to keep the government in check so that the cure isn't worse than the disease. That's all I would like to say. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Madison laid it out for us. He knew how to do this because he was unique. He combined the biggest library in America at the time, plus at age 25, he sat sitting cheek by jowl to all these sociopaths in the Continental Congress, Virginia legislature as a politician. So he understood their minds. He didn't have this delusion that you could have angels, even George Washington, who could make the system work if you didn't pit ambition against ambition. And he developed the most magnificent machinery ever to keep the government in check, and we all threw it away. And that's where we are today. We can go back and live through the liberty and the wisdom of James Madison, or we can go down the road of the Roman Empire, and we really know where that leads.
Well said. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to just kind of, again, point to what you just said and argue, like well, I guess one step back actually first. My main point in regard to the government aspect, I am very clearly more of an anarchist in this mindset of, and to be clear, people that don't understand, that doesn't mean no laws, it means no rulers. And there's a very different conversation to have about what anarchism really is. It's funny enough, it's the only ideology that has no place for rulers. I wonder why they don't want you to know what it means. It's chaos, but the point is that I do believe that there's a world that could exist where that's not required. And I think that that's something we should at the very least have an open and ongoing conversation about. But to your point, I've always argued that if we are forced to live in a state of society, which is what this is, I've never seen a better example of how the people can have an influence on that outcome than what we live in this country, or at least the way it was set up, exactly like you're highlighting, that we've now lost touch with. I very much agree with that. The Constitution, I think, is a foundational and important, it is everything. It is the essence on what this country is supposed to be built on, and we've lost that. So I agree with you. And I think that if we're going even in the direction of what I want, we're still aiming in the same direction, Bruce, and we just need to get to what you're saying first, and I think that's what we all need to keep talking about. And as I said, and I'll end on that same point, with everything going on, with the partisan mania, with the as Jeffrey's pointed out many times, the almost willfulness of people to be willfully ignorant in the side of their chosen gospel, it's important that we, of all things today, err on the side of your principles, right? So it's like with the lesser of evils conversation, it shouldn't have been about like, well, this is what we're left with. No, if that's the case, then you err on the side of your principles and you say that I'm not voting for any of them. That's how we have to be today. Err on the side of principle and integrity and stop listening to the narrative. I mean, you can consider it, but make sure you're focusing on the outcome. Look at the precedent. What have they always done? Not what they've always said, not what they're claiming they're going to do tomorrow. What have they always done and what just happened? That's all we need to do, because as you're saying, we've discussed the entire day, it kind of breaks through all of the different nonsense. So thank both of you for having me on again. I'd love to do this again. I find these to be important conversations. So thank you both.
Thank you both very, very much. And Ryan, yes, I want to make this a regular thing. So I'd like to put a regular schedule in place so we have this conversation on a regular basis. And, I'm sure we're going to continue to find a lot of different things to talk about. So thank you very much. And I hope you both have a wonderful day.
Okay. Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks, Ryan.
Bye.
Okay.